Chapter 1376. In the sky, Xian rode his sword in silence. When he saw the Dao breakers in the White Cloak army, he had an idea. The fifth dimension also needed such a powerful army. An army dedicated to protecting the fifth dimension. The Sword-Sect Swordsmen. The Sword-Sect Swordsmen had a solid foundation, and these people were no weaker than the Dao breakers in the White Cloak army in terms of temperament and talent. The Sword-Sect's people didn't lack hard work, but fortune crystals. As long as they had enough fortune crystals, he believed that the Sword-Sect Swordsmen wouldn't be any weaker than the White Cloak army and the Dao breakers. Sister Nian's death made him understand that the fifth dimension couldn't be saved by one person. He had to nurture more experts. The Sword-Sect's experts had all reached the self-release realm. As long as they had the fortune crystals, he believed that it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the Dao validation realm. This was because Xian had the Dao scripture. As long as they reached the Dao validation realm, the Sword-Sect Swordsmen wouldn't be any weaker than the Dao breakers and the White Cloak army. Of course, the prerequisite was that they had fortune crystals. Fortune crystals. When he thought of this, Xian sped up. Mount Baiqiu. There was also a supreme-grade spirit vein inside the mountain, which could produce more than 100,000 fortune divine crystals in a year. With more than 100,000 fortune divine crystals, many Dao validation realm experts could be nurtured, and even Dao defense realm experts could be nurtured. Moreover, even if they reached the Dao validation and Dao defending realms, they would still need fortune crystals to nurture them. After reaching the Dao validation and Dao defending realms, ordinary energy was useless to them. Because of this, the ore veins within the heaven abyss were so important. It could be said that these ore veins were the lifeline of the Dao Ting and the Dao Tomb. Mount Baiqiu was also guarded by the White Cloak army. There weren't many of them, only 30 or so. However, there was a divine sovereign standing guard. The reason why there were so few people was because the Dao Tomb had never taken the initiative to attack. All along, the Dao Tomb had been passively defending. When Xian and the others arrived at Baiqiu Mountain, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Xian. Divine Lord. Dao Defense State. The old man was stunned when he saw Xian. And then he said in a low voice, Xian. Xian was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, retreat. With that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. The White Cloak army on Mount Baiqiu also began to retreat. At the sight of that, everyone behind Xian was struck dumb. Xian was also slightly stunned. Leaving just like that. As if he had thought of something, Xian's expression gradually became solemn. Doubting was afraid of Xian? No. They weren't afraid of Xian at all. At most, they would be fearful of him. They'd retreated without a fight because they wanted to preserve their strength and avoid making unnecessary sacrifices. Xian glanced at the sky. He knew that Dao Ting wouldn't attack now, but once he did, it would be the final battle. Xian didn't think too much about it and led them into Mount Baiqiu. As soon as Xian entered Mount Baiqiu, he immediately swept away all the divine creation crystals within it. There were more than 10,000 of them. It was obvious that the old man and the others didn't know that Xian was coming, so they hadn't been able to take the divine creation crystals with them. Over 10,000 divine creation crystals. In the belly of the mountain, an idea suddenly occurred to Xian. Dao Ting had more than 30 supreme-grade veins, and these veins would definitely contain divine creation crystals. On the other hand, he'd investigated before, and no matter if it was the Dao Tomb or the Dao Court, they would harvest it once a month. Because after these fortune divine crystals were formed, they needed to be nourished in the mine for at least a month. Only then would the fortune divine crystal be larger and its energy purer. At this thought, Xian turned and left. He left Mount Baiqiu, but this time he left alone. There was a large mountain range 3,000 li south of Mount Baiqiu. This mountain range was known as the Southern Mountain Range. There was a supreme-grade vein in this mountain range, and there were many experts guarding this place. There were a total of 6 divine sovereigns and hundreds of White Cloak army soldiers. Moreover, after Mount Baiqiu had fallen, Fu Su's army and experts had immediately stationed themselves here because this place was closest to Mount Baiqiu. It was obvious that they were afraid that Xian's next target would be this southern mountain range. And they would not give up on this supreme-grade vein in the southern mountain range. Xian did not go to the southern mountain range. Instead, he went to the Taihang Mountains, 1,000 li behind the southern mountain range. There was also a supreme-grade vein in the Taihang Mountains. Xian successfully snuck into the Taihang Mountains. With his current strength, It would be difficult for most people to discover him as long as he did not want to be discovered. After entering the Taihang Mountains, Yi Xian smiled. There were more than 10,000 divine creation crystals in the Taihang Mountains. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian swept all the divine creation crystals clean. However, the moment he collected the divine creation crystals, an angry roar suddenly rang out from outside the Taihang Mountains. In the next moment, dozens of powerful auras rushed into the interior of the Taihang Mountains. At this moment, the interior of the Taihang Mountains was empty. Yi Xian had long since disappeared. Within the interior of the Taihang Mountains, an old man's expression was frighteningly gloomy. The divine creation crystals were gone. They had been stolen. The old man could not help but curse. They actually stole them. Shameless. After leaving the Taihang Mountains, Yi Xian did not go back. Instead, he continued to the next supreme-grade mineral vein in the Daoting. Soon, one supreme-grade spirit vein after another in the Daoting was plundered clean. The Divine Palace. This was the residence of the white-robed Divine General and the core of the Southern Abyss. At this moment, almost all the Dao Defense Realm experts in the Daoting in the Southern Abyss had gathered in the main hall. Inside the hall, these Dao Defense Realm experts had extremely ugly expressions. Yi Xian was stealing the divine creation crystals. However, there was nothing they could do about Yi Xian, who specialized in stealing divine crystals of fortune, because they could not find Yi Xian at all. Moreover, they also knew that even if they found him, a few divine emperors would not be able to do anything to this Yi Xian. So far, Yi Xian had stolen 15 supreme-grade mineral veins. In order to prevent Yi Xian from continuing to steal, they had already taken away the remaining divine creation crystals in some supreme-grade spirit veins. Although they had stopped the losses in time, this time the Daoting could be said to have suffered a heavy loss. Because Yi Xian had taken at least 200,000 divine creation crystals. 200,000. A divine emperor's monthly allowance was only 3,000 divine creation crystals. But Yi Xian had stolen more than 200,000 divine creation crystals in one go. Inside the hall, everyone was filled with righteous indignation, and their faces were terrifyingly gloomy. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in the hall. The old man glanced at the crowd. Meeting adjourned. Hearing this, everyone in the hall was stunned. The meeting was adjourned just like that? Where was the white-robed divine general? Inside the hall, many people were discussing, but the old man had already turned around and disappeared. Inside the hall, everyone was dumbfounded. What was this? Those divine creation crystals were given to Yi Xian just like that? Yi Xian did not return to Beacon Hill. Instead, he went directly to the Heavenly King Hall. Inside the hall, Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian with a smile. Congratulations, you've made a fortune. Yi Xian flicked a finger and a storage ring landed in front of Qin Yaoyao. Qin Yaoyao glanced at it. Inside the storage ring were 100,000 divine creation crystals. She looked at Yi Xian. What are you doing? Yi Xian said, protection fee. Qin Yaoyao blinked. Protection fee? Yi Xian nodded. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. After a moment she suddenly smiled. She naturally understood what Yi Xian meant. Why could Yi Xian act so fearlessly here? Was there really no one in the Daoting who could restrain Yi Xian? No, there was someone. Disregarding everything else, White Robe was definitely able to suppress Yi Xian. However, White Robe did not make a move. Why? Because if White Robe made a move, Qin Yaoyao would definitely make a move. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. She had not expected Yi Xian to take out 100,000 divine creation crystals. This guy was very greedy, but he was also very rational. Greed was nothing to be afraid of, but insatiable greed. Qin Yaoyao picked up the teacup beside her and took a sip. Then she said, Daoting has not made any moves until now. What do you think? Yi Xian said, White Robe is waiting. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. Waiting for what? Yi Xian said, once he makes a move he will definitely not give you or me any chance. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, you seem very calm. Aren't you afraid? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian asked, if I fight White Robe, what's my chance? Qin Yaoyao shook her head. You have no chance. Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. What about you? Qin Yaoyao said with a smile, 460. Yi Xian was silent. Qin Yaoyao stood up and walked to the entrance of the hall. As you said, White Robe has not made a move until now. This is very abnormal and not like his style. Xian suddenly said, if I were White Robe Miss Yao, do you know what I would do? Qin Yaoyao turned to look at Xian. Xian looked back at Qin Yaoyao. If I were White Robe, I would gather all the troops here to fight Miss Yaoyao to the death and decide the winner in one battle. Qin Yaoyao was silent. Xian walked in front of Qin Yaoyao and looked at her. Miss Yaoyao, do you think he won't do that? Qi Yaoyao said, if he does that, it will be mutual destruction. Xian said with a smile, mutual destruction? No, I think that if he does that, your side will lose without a doubt. Qin Yaoyao looked at Xian. Why? Xian said, momentum. White Robe's name strikes fear into the hearts of the experts of the Dao Tomb. If he brings the entire White Robe army here, believe me, as long as Rahu and the others don't make a move, Miss Yaoyao, your side is definitely no match for them. He looked outside the hall and said softly, Miss Yaoyao, the doubting is very united, much more so than the Dao Tomb. Just this alone is enough to prove that you are no match for them. Let me guess, they're not afraid of you but of the great lord of the Dao Tomb, am I right? Qin Yaoyao was silent. Xian said with a smile, Miss Yaoyao, think about it again. The doubting has no Dao ancestor and the Dao Tomb has no lord. What do you think White Robe and the others will do? Qin Yaoyao slowly closed her eyes. Xian said, White Robe and the others may not have done this before, but now that I'm here, they will have no choice but to do so. They can't let me continue acting so arrogantly, can they? Qin Yaoyao looked at Xian and said with a smile, you forgot to mention one thing. If White Robe brings everyone here and he doesn't want to fight, he wants to kill you. When that happens, do you think the Dao Tomb will protect you or not? Right at this moment, the space in the sky suddenly split apart, and then a man in a white robe walked out from within the split in space. Aspira White Robe. White Robe. The strongest divine general of the Dao Ting. Down below, Qin Yaoyao gently touched Xian's arm with her right arm and said with a smile, are you panicking? Xian. At this moment, White Robe looked at Xian. You have the God's seal and are also a Dao protector. Since you are a Dao protector, I can give you a chance. If you are willing to enter the doubting, I will let bygones be bygones. Xian gently touched Qin Yaoyao's arm with his left hand. Are you panicking? Qin Yaoyao. Chapter 1377. Was he panicking? Yaoyao was silent. She knew that if Xian nodded and agreed, then doubting would really let bygones be bygones. Even if White Emperor Star Sovereign wanted to pursue the matter, he could not. With White Robe's protection, no one could stop him except that Dao ancestor. However, she did not panic at all, because she knew that Xian would not join doubting. Yaoyao looked at Xian and smiled. You won't join doubting, right? Xian smiled. Yes. Yaoyao looked at White Robe and smiled. White Robe, did you hear that? White Robe glanced at Xian. Take a spear from me? Xian looked straight at White Robe. All right. White Robe did not waste any words and stabbed with his spear. The space in front of Xian split open. At this time, Xian suddenly took a step forward and 4 domains appeared. At the same time, his entire body became covered in blood. He had used all his trump cards. Facing White Robe, Xian naturally did not dare to hold back. He attacked with all his strength. Within the 4 domains, Xian stabbed with his sword. Boom. Xian was pushed back by the spear attack. He was pushed back thousands of feet, and when he stopped, he spat out a mouthful of blood. In the sky, White Robe glanced at Xian. Not bad. With that, he turned and disappeared. Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and grinned. At this time, Yaoyao suddenly said, What are you laughing at? Xian smiled. He wanted to kill me with a spear. Yaoyao looked at Xian. Yes. But you blocked it. So are you proud? Xian shook his head. I'm laughing because I know what level my strength is at now. With that, he slowly closed his eyes. In that exchange, he had lost. But he was very happy, because he had discovered his own shortcomings. Realm. In that exchange just now, there was no battle technique involved. It was just a simple suppression of realm and strength. If he reached the Dao defense realm, he would be able to put up a fight against Jinwu or White Robe. Even now, he still had the strength to fight. He couldn't win, but that didn't mean he couldn't fight. Especially after activating the power of his bloodline, he could fight anyone. He had to find a way to reach the Dao defense realm. At this thought, Xian looked towards Kun Yaoyao. Miss Yaoyao, can you do me a favor? Qing Yaoyao asked in a deep voice. You want to reach the Tao controlling realm? Yi Xian nodded. Feng Yaoyao was silent. Yi Xian asked, is it very difficult? Qi Yaoyao didn't say anything. Yi Xian smiled and said, the Tomb of Tao doesn't want me to reach the Tao defense realm? Ting Yaoyao nodded. Yi Xian smiled. Understood. Ting Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. You will become the Tomb of Tao's enemy? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Miss Yaoyao, you should ask the Tomb of Tao, not me. Ting Yaoyao was silent for a moment before saying softly, I'll be frank with you. It's best if you don't reach the Tao defense realm now. Yi Xian frowned. Why? Ting Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. Because doubting won't let you reach the Tao defense realm. I'm willing to bet that doubting will kill you at all costs if you try to reach the Tao defense realm now. Moreover, the Tomb of Tao may have other intentions. After you reach the Tao defense realm, you will be at least 10 times more threatening than you are now. Yi Xian was already very terrifying now. If he reached the Tao defense realm, even the Tomb of Tao would be afraid of him, let alone doubting. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. It's too difficult for me. Then he turned and left. Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, wait. Yi Xian turned to look at Ting Yaoyao. She flicked her finger and a storage ring landed in front of Yi Xian. It was the storage ring Yi Xian had given her. There were 100,000 fortune crystals inside. Yi Xian smiled. This is the protection fee. Ting Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. You seized 2 supreme grade mines for the Tomb of Tao. This is my reward for you. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. This is 100,000 fortune crystals. Ting Yaoyao blinked. Do I look like I need money? Yi Xian, Ting Yaoyao smiled. You really need this now. Take it. Yi Xian didn't refuse. He took the storage ring. Thanks. Then he turned and left. He looked at Yi Xian in the distance in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. Divine Palace. Inside the palace, White Robe sat cross-legged on the ground. Behind him stood an old man. The old man said in a deep voice, Divine General, how is that young man? White Robe said, not bad. Not bad. The old man's expression turned serious. This was a very high evaluation. The old man asked again, Divine General, what are your plans? White Robe said softly, wait. The old man frowned. Divine General, if we continue to wait like this, once Yi Xian reaches the Tao Imperial Realm. White Robe opened his eyes. Why should we be afraid of the enemy? The old man wanted to say something but stopped. White Robe slowly closed his eyes. Yi Xian returned to the 5th dimension. The current 5th dimension was unprecedentedly powerful. The spiritual qi was also unprecedentedly rich. There were more than 160 dragon veins in the 5th dimension. The origin of the 5th dimension, which was the origin spirit, was also slowly recovering. However, her recovery speed was a little slow. Now she was also slowly spreading her origin power between heaven and earth. In short, everything in the 5th dimension was getting better and better. And in that starry sky, which was also the starfield where Moon Yanyan's main body was located, more and more mysterious energy appeared in this starry sky and slowly gathered towards Moon Yanyan's main body. Sword Sect. After returning to the 5th dimension, Yi Xian directly went to the Sword Sect. At this time, the Sword Sect had 320 swordsmen. These swordsmen had all reached Release 1. True Release 1. Their current goal was to reach Tao Confirmation. Currently, in the entire 5th dimension, there were still very few who had reached Tao Confirmation. Only Arrow and Lanxio and the others had done so with the help of 3 lives and Tao scriptures. However, with these fortune divine crystals, Yi Xian believed that more and more people would reach Tao Confirmation in the future. Inside the Sword Sect's main hall, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him were 5 Tao scriptures. There were 9 Tao scriptures in total and he currently had 5. If he could gather all 9, he could summon the great Tao spirit. He naturally did not forget Sister Nian's words. Gather the Tao scriptures, awaken the great Tao spirit, and then let the great Tao spirit help him. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly asked, knowing destiny, is the great Tao spirit very strong? Yi knowing destiny, I don't know. Yi Xian blinked. You haven't seen it before? Yi knowing destiny said in a deep voice, no. The great Tao spirit is recorded, but I have never seen it before. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian put away the Tao scriptures. He looked at his right hand and slowly clenched it. A powerful force condensed in his fist. Dao fist. He rarely used this Dao scripture martial art not because it was not powerful enough but because it was too powerful. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly said, Dao fist, Dao fist. Saying this, he opened his palm and the executing heaven sword appeared in his hand. Why didn't he fuse his Dao fist with his sword? Just do it. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and a powerful force suddenly condensed in his hand. In the end, this force began to gather in the executing heaven sword in his hand. The executing heaven sword began to tremble violently. Crack. At this moment the surrounding space suddenly cracked. A trace of excitement flashed in Yi Xian's eyes. He did not expect it to work. Yi Xian slowly raised the executing heaven sword. In the executing heaven sword, other than his own sword Dao power, there was also the power of the Dao fist. He completely fused the two forces into one. However, the force was too strong and he felt that his body could not withstand it. Yi Xian quickly stopped. He looked at the executing heaven sword in his hand and a moment later he began again. The power of sword Dao and Dao fist merged. He wanted to create a new sword skill. In order to control these two powerful forces, he began to use his sword domain to suppress them. However, he found that even the sword domain could not suppress these two forces, so he used the death domain and the blood domain. Under the suppression of the three domains, he began to slowly control the power of the Dao fist and his sword Dao. Dao fist. One fist contained the great Dao. After fusing the power into the sword, his sword naturally became a Dao sword. One sword contained the great Dao. In the main hall, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and in his three domains, an extremely powerful force constantly shook. Fortunately, there were three domains to suppress it, or the main hall would have been turned to dust. Just like that, Yi Xian began to slowly try to control these two forces. Heaven Abyss. Although Yi Xian had taken 2 supreme-grade spirit veins, and Yi Xian had stolen more than 200,000 fortune divine crystals, Doubting did not take any revenge. Outside Heaven Abyss, in the Heavenly Palace, Bai Dizzy sat on a chair, thinking silently. Not far from him was True Martial Divine Lord. They already knew about what happened in Heaven Abyss. At this moment, True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "Are we still waiting?" Bai Dizzy opened his eyes, looked outside the hall and said softly, "Wait." True Martial Divine Lord looked at Bai Dizzy. "What are you waiting for?" In fact, he and White Robe were already prepared to kill Yi Xian at all costs. They did not want to see Yi Xian reach the Dao defense realm. Once Yi Xian reached the Dao defense realm, it would be extraordinarily difficult to kill him. However, his and White Robe's plan was stopped by Bai Dizzy. He and White Robe chose to respect Bai Dizzy's insistence. Bai Dizzy got up, walked to the door of the hall and said softly, "Qianli and Divine Wind should be finding her soon." Divine Lord True Martial understood immediately. The woman in the plain dress. Bai Dizzy had already sent people to look for the woman in the plain dress. True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "So what if they find her?" Bai Dizzy said softly, "True Martial, I know you're worried, but forgive me for being blunt. Why did Doubting end up like this? It's because we underestimated Moon Yen Yen. I don't want to underestimate anyone. Especially this woman in the plain dress. I won't be at ease until I find her." True Martial was silent for a moment, then said, "Do you think this woman in the plain dress is stronger than Moon Yen Yen?" Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. "Theoretically speaking, there shouldn't be. I don't believe there's a woman stronger than Moon Yen Yen in this world. Even if there is, it's impossible for us to meet all of them. People like Moon Yen Yen were already spiritual beings. Could there be a woman stronger than her?" Bai Dizzy would never believe it. Just as True Martial was about to speak, Bai Dizzy suddenly opened his eyes. They found her. Somewhere in the distant starry sky, 2 middle-aged men were sprinting in the starry sky. One of the men said excitedly, "Divine Wind, I can already feel her aura. We'll be able to see her soon." The man called Divine Wind was also excited. "After a month of relentless searching, we finally found her." As soon as he said that, the 2 men's speed suddenly increased. P.S. Thank you for all the tips from the readers, thank you very much. I don't update much, sometimes I'm still sloppy, I have a lot of typos, I often dig holes and don't bury them. If I wasn't handsome, you guys would have run away. Am I right? To be honest, many readers read my book because they covet my beauty. Chapter 1378. This was an unknown starry sky. The starry sky was deep and filled with twinkling stars that crisscrossed each other. At first glance, it was like an exquisite painting that was pleasing to the eye. The starry sky was beautiful, but it was also frightening, as it was unknown. This starry sky had no end. No one knew what was in it. In the depths of this starry sky, a sword-wielding woman walked slowly. The woman wore a plain dress that was spotless. She walked slowly like a lonely traveler. No one knew where she was going. She didn't know either. However, she wasn't lost at all. When a person has someone they care about, their life will have meaning. Longevity? She had never thought about longevity. In the past, her long life had only brought her loneliness. Invincible? She had been invincible for a very, very long time. As for this endless universe and the endless end of the martial path, she wasn't curious at all. She couldn't create this endless universe, but she could destroy it. No matter how powerful the universe was, it was nothing more than a strike from her sword. As for the end of the martial path, if it really had an end, would it be able to stop her sword? Right now, she only wanted to do one thing. She wanted to reach that end and kill that person. When that time came, perhaps she would stop and look at the scenery of this world. But now, apart from that person, everything else seemed unnecessary to her. At that moment, the woman in the plain dress stopped in her tracks. Not far in front of her was a huge black pyramid. The black pyramid was tens of thousands of meters tall, and it towered in the starry sky. In front of the black pyramid was a statue of a man. The man held a spear and looked up at the starry sky. The woman in the plain dress stopped in her tracks and looked at the black pyramid. At that moment, the starry sky behind her suddenly trembled. Soon 2 men appeared behind her. They were Divine Wind and Qianli. The 2 of them looked exhausted. Naturally, they would be exhausted. For the past month, they had been searching for the woman in the plain dress without sleep or rest. Fortunately, the heavens didn't disappoint those who worked hard. They had finally found her. The woman in the plain dress looked at the 2 of them without saying a word. At that moment, Divine Wind frowned. Qianli, something's wrong. Qianli scanned his surroundings and his expression quickly darkened. At that moment, the 2 of them suddenly realized that this galaxy was no longer the galaxy they were familiar with. The records of the Daoting didn't include this galaxy. Where is this? At this moment, both of them had the same question in their minds. Qianli suddenly looked at the plain-dressed woman. Where is this place? The plain-clothed woman still did not speak. Qianli's brows knit together slightly, and he was about to speak when God Wind spoke solemnly. Something's off. Qianli looked at Divine Wind. Divine Wind stared at Qianli. Can you sense her? Qianli looked at the woman in a plain dress when he heard this, and his expression quickly became solemn. Because he couldn't sense the woman in the plain dress in front of him. The plainly dressed woman was standing in front of him, but he couldn't feel her. Divine Wind glanced at the woman in a plain dress and said, "We've probably encountered a formidable obstacle." After a moment of silence, Qianli cupped his fists towards the woman in the plain dress. Do you know Zhou Xian? He decided to use peaceful measures before resorting to force. The person in front of him was clearly a tough one. It was better not to make a move first. It was better to be more stable. Zhou Xian. When she heard Qianli's words, there was finally a trace of emotion in the woman's eyes and she nodded slightly. I know him. Qianli looked at the plain-dressed woman. Do you know our origins? The woman shook her head. Qianli said, We're from Daoting. We're here on the orders of Lord Taibai Jinxing to look for you. The woman looked at Qianli and her voice was emotionless. Are you courting death? Qianli was speechless. Divine Wind suddenly said, Let's retreat. At this moment he sensed danger. As heavenly generals of Daoting, both of them weren't idiots. At this moment, both of them sensed that something was off when they saw the woman in a plain dress. Danger. That's the feeling. Qianli said in a low voice. Are we leaving just like that? Divine Wind looked at the woman in a plain dress. We might not be able to defeat her. Qianli said in a low voice. How will we explain to Lord Taibai Jinxing if we leave just like that? As he spoke, he looked at the woman in a plain dress. Even if we can't defeat her if we join forces, it shouldn't be a problem for us to retreat unscathed. Divine Wind fell silent. Actually, he still felt slightly uneasy. The woman in front of him stood there without saying a word. She looked harmless, but he felt uneasy in his heart. However, as Qianli had said, how would he explain if he returned just like that? At this thought, Divine Wind made up his mind. Then let's fight. Qianli looked at the woman in a plain dress and said with a smile, Your Excellency, to be honest, the two of us are here to seek guidance from Your Excellency. Please enlighten us. The woman in a plain dress shook her head. There's no need for guidance. I'll grant you death. As soon as she finished speaking, she disappeared. Behind her, both Qianli and Xinfeng's bodies stiffened. Both of their eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. Even in death, they didn't know when the woman in a plain dress had attacked. A moment later, Divine Wind suddenly said in a trembling voice, Doubting is in danger. Qianli slowly closed his eyes. Doubting is dead. As soon as he finished speaking, both of them completely disappeared into the starry sky. They were directly wiped out. The woman in a plain dress walked into the distance. When she approached the Black Pyramid, the statue in front of the pyramid suddenly opened its eyes and looked down at the woman in a plain dress. Mortal. The voice was cold and emotionless. The woman in a plain dress paid no attention to the statue and continued walking towards the Black Pyramid. Seeing this, the statue frowned. However, he didn't make a move because he sensed danger. The stronger one was, the more they could sense the power of the woman in a plain dress. Behind the woman in a plain dress, the statue said again, You don't have a divine body or godhead. Why are you so powerful? The woman in a plain dress still didn't answer. She walked to the Black Pyramid and casually waved her hand. The impenetrable Black Pyramid immediately split open. The woman in a plain dress walked slowly. The statue didn't stop her because he didn't dare. Soon, the woman in a plain dress entered the Black Pyramid. But soon she walked out again. After coming out, she looked into the distance. At the end of the starry sky was a huge abyss, and in the abyss was a Black Pyramid. The woman in a plain dress suddenly said, What is this place? The statue hurriedly said, Ancient God Abyss. The woman in a plain dress nodded slightly. She opened her palm and a sword suddenly appeared in her hand. In the next moment, an extremely powerful sword aura enveloped the entire Ancient God Abyss. In an instant, the entire Ancient God Abyss became illusory. Seeing this, the statue was stunned. She wanted to destroy the Ancient God Abyss. But at this moment, in the huge abyss, people suddenly appeared on the Black Pyramids. They were all illusory, not their real bodies. Everyone looked at the woman in a plain dress. In their eyes, there was an unprecedented seriousness. Every person standing on the pyramid was at least at the peak of the Tao attainment realm. However, at this moment, everyone's faces were extremely solemn. In their eyes, there was only fear. Deep fear. Just one sword strike was enough to make them feel despair. No one resisted. No one dared. No one could. Under the shroud of the sword aura, the entire Black Pyramid in the Ancient God Abyss actually trembled and then slowly cracked. The entire Ancient God Abyss was about to be erased. And in the field, no one dared to resist. At this moment, a black-robed elder suddenly appeared in front of the woman in a plain dress. The black-robed elder's aura was as vast as the starry sky, unfathomable. Above the Tao attainment realm, the black-robed elder bowed slightly to the woman in a plain dress and smiled bitterly. I'm Suja, may I know how I've offended you? The woman in a plain dress looked at Suja. No. Suja was slightly puzzled. Then why do you want to destroy us? The woman in a plain dress fell silent for a moment. Your strength is too strong for my brother. It's not something he can bear at his age. So all of you can die. Hearing this, Suzhou and the others were dumbfounded. We're strong and threaten your brother, so you want to kill us. What kind of logic is that? Is it wrong for us to be strong? That's not human. Suddenly, the sword in the woman's hand trembled, and in the next moment, the surrounding pyramids actually started to crack inch by inch. Everyone's expression changed drastically when they saw this. At this moment, Suzhou hurriedly said, Please be merciful. Don't worry, we will definitely not become enemies with your brother. Damn it, what a joke. You're so strong, how would we dare to become enemies with your brother? Meanwhile, the sword in the woman's hand calmed down. When they saw this scene, the expressions of the strong cultivators in the crowd instantly relaxed. The woman in the plain dress looked at Suzhou, and Suzhou hurriedly asked, Is your brother from the dark abyss? The woman in the plain dress shook her head. Suzhou heaved a huge sigh of relief in his heart and he hurriedly said, Don't worry, we will not become enemies with your brother, absolutely not. The woman in the plain dress thought for a moment and then said, I'm going to a very far place and all of you are a huge threat to him. I'm worried. Zhou Xian's expression changed drastically and he hurriedly said, Don't worry, we will definitely not become enemies with your brother. We can swear on our souls. As he spoke, he hurriedly looked at the people in the crowd. Swear. Hurry up and swear. At this moment, Zhou Xian was on the verge of tears. Big sister, please let us go. We don't dare to become enemies with your brother. In the crowd, the people in the crowd hurriedly swore as well. They had no choice but to be cowards at this time. The woman in the plain dress fell silent. After she swore, everyone in the crowd looked at the woman in the plain dress, and the stone that had dropped in their hearts rose again. The woman in front of them was so strong that it made them feel despair. It was really despair. Ordinary people could not feel the strength of the woman in the plain dress, but they could. Just that one sword strike was enough to destroy everyone in the crowd. That sword strike had already exceeded their understanding. After a moment, the woman in the plain dress looked at the crowd and then turned to leave. Seeing this scene, everyone in the crowd heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, the woman in the plain dress stopped again. Seeing this, everyone's expression changed. The woman in the plain dress waved her right hand, and a portrait appeared in front of Zhou Xian. It was a portrait of Xian. The woman in the plain dress looked at Zhou Xian. This is my brother. Zhou Xian looked at the portrait and then hurriedly turned to look at the people in the crowd. Look carefully. Look carefully. Everyone hurriedly looked at the portrait. They looked very carefully. The woman in the plain dress looked at the crowd. Don't bully my brother. After saying that, she turned around and left. Not long after, she disappeared into the starry sky. In the arena, Zhou Xian shook his head and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Oh my God, who's the one bullying who? Is there still law in this world? Is there still justice in this world? Is there still justice in this world? Chapter 1379. Two Worlds Abyss Heavenly Palace Grand Hall. Bai Dizzy, who was sitting on a chair, suddenly stood up. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Zhenwu looked at Bai Dizzy from afar. What's wrong? Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Divine Wind and Qianli are dead. Dead. Lord Zhenwu was silent. The hall was silent. After a long time, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, It seems that this woman is stronger than we thought. Zhenwu looked at Bai Dizzy. We can't wait any longer. Xian will reach Imperial Dao if we wait any longer. Bai Dizzy was silent. Zhenwu said, I know you're worried about the woman, but we really don't have that much time now. Xian is now at the peak of Dao validation. If the Dao tomb helps him reach Imperial Dao, it will be very difficult for us to kill him. Bai Dizzy looked at Zhenwu. Zhenwu, I suggest we figure out Xian's identity and the woman's identity first. Zhenwu frowned. Xian's identity? Bai Dizzy nodded. This person has a special bloodline and I haven't found the origin of that bloodline. Then he shook his head, his eyes full of worry. The more he investigated Xian, the more he realized that Xian was not simple. As if thinking of something, Bai Dizzy shook his head again and sighed. He had thought that after Moon Yanyan's death, it would be much easier for Dao Ting to kill Xian. But now he found that things were not as simple as he thought. At this time, Zhenwu suddenly said, We can't wait any longer. Bai Dizzy looked at Zhenwu. Zhenwu said, Whether his background is simple or not, we have no way out. We will kill him in the future and we will kill him now. Why not kill him now? Bai Dizzy was silent. Zhenwu continued. Bai Dizzy, you have to understand that once this person attains the Imperial Dao, even I won't be able to kill him. But now we only need to pay a small price to kill him. Bai Dizzy said in a low voice, The Dao tomb. Zhenwu said, We will give the people of the Dao tomb a choice. As for how they choose, it will be up to them. After a long silence, Bai Dizzy no longer hesitated. Kill. True Martial Divine Lord nodded and looked outside the hall. Make all the necessary preparations. Bai Dizzy nodded and got up to leave. Somewhere in the starry sky, Xian stood with his sword in hand. His eyes were closed and the executing heaven sword was trembling slightly in his hand. After an unknown period of time, Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and then he slashed with his sword. A streak of sword light pierced through the air. In the blink of an eye, the starry sky within a radius of nearly 100,000 kilometers was reduced to nothingness. Erased. The Daoist fist and the power of his sword Dao. He could now control both of these powers. When these two powers combined, they were at least 3 times stronger than the Taoist fist. After the strike, Yi Xian felt his body become extremely empty, as if it had been sucked dry. Fortunately, his physical body was strong enough. Otherwise, his body would have been destroyed by this sword. Yi Xian looked at the executing heaven sword in his hand. Let's call it the Taoist sword. This sword contained the great Tao. After a while, Yi Xian sheathed his sword, looked around and then turned to leave. Yi Xian returned to the Heavenly King city. Qi Yaoyao stood quietly at the entrance of the Heavenly King Hall, as if waiting for Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked over to Qi Yaoyao and was just about to speak when the space in the sky above the Heavenly King Hall suddenly split open. In the next moment, a middle-aged man appeared in the sky. White robes. Behind the white-robed man, there were more than 1,000 experts. Among them there were a total of 36 gods. 36 divine lords. Besides them, all the top experts of the White Cloak Army were here. Yi Xian looked at the sky in silence. Qi Yaoyao smiled. Are you panicking? Yi Xian nodded. A little. Qi Yaoyao said softly, they're negotiating. Yi Xian looked at Qi Yaoyao. Luo Ho and True Marshal? Qi Yaoyao nodded. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Yaoyao, I want to see how they negotiate. Qi Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, can I? Qi Yaoyao nodded. Yes. With that, she and Yi Xian disappeared. The next moment, the two appeared in a small pavilion. Yi Xian saw a few familiar faces. By Dizzy, True Marshal Divine Lord Luo Ho Aku Wang. Everyone was stunned by Yi Xian's sudden appearance. Qi Yaoyao smiled. He wants to see how you negotiate, so I brought him here. You guys continue. Luo Ho looked at Qi Yaoyao in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. We meet again. Bai Dizzy smiled. You're a little late. We're done. Yi Xian smiled. Let me guess. You gave Senior Luo Ho a condition he couldn't refuse, right? Luo Ho suddenly said, 10 Supreme Grade Spirit Veins. And we won't fight for 20 years. 10 Supreme Grade Spirit Veins. Yi Xian smiled. Does Senior Luo Ho agree? Luo Ho nodded. We can't refuse. Just as he said, the Dao Tomb couldn't refuse. As long as the Dao Tomb didn't do anything, they would get the 10 Supreme Grade Spirit Veins. Moreover, they could use the doubting to kill Yi Xian. As long as the doubting killed Yi Xian, would the people behind Yi Xian let it go? They definitely wouldn't let it go. Could be said that once Yi Xian died, the people behind him would fight the doubting to the death. At that time, the Dao Tomb would reap the benefits. In short, giving up on Yi Xian had only benefits. Luo Ho stood up and looked at Qi Yaoyao. Let's go. Qi Yaoyao didn't move. Luo Ho frowned. Qi Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Aren't you going to say something? Yi Xian was silent. Qi Yaoyao walked in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. Have you given up? Yi Xian suddenly looked at Luo Ho and smiled. Senior Luo Ho, I have to say that you underestimate me too much. What, I'm only worth 10 Supreme Grade Spirit Veins. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, you're a smart person. There are some things that you can understand without saying, right? Yi Xian nodded. I understand. However, there is something that Senior Luo Ho will definitely be interested in. Luo Ho nodded. Speak. Yi Xian smiled. I can gather all 9 scriptures. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. The scriptures are still in your hands. Yi Xian smiled. Senior is a smart person. There are some things that we don't need to say. What do you think? Luo Ho smiled. Yes. However, what makes you say that you can gather all 9 scriptures? According to my knowledge, you only have 5 right now, right? Yi Xian glanced at them and then he smiled. Senior Luo Ho, I'll answer that question later. Everyone, if I'm not wrong, then all of you are definitely very curious about my identity and background, right? Luo Ho gazed at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Just as Yi Xian had said, he was indeed curious about Yi Xian's identity and background. Bai Dizzy suddenly smiled. What? Are you going to introduce yourself? Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm and the Heaven and Earth Gourd appeared in his hand. Luo Ho frowned when he saw the Heaven and Earth Gourd because he didn't recognize it. However, Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically. The Heaven and Earth Gourd. Yi Xian gazed at Bai Dizzy while a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. This old man is really experienced and knowledgeable. He even knows the Heaven and Earth Gourd. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at Yi Xian. That place you're from. Luoho gazed at Yi Xian. What place? Yi Xian smiled and said, the whirling world. Luoho's expression changed when he heard this. The whirling world. Even the doubting sects and the Dao tomb were quite unfamiliar to this place. Because even they didn't know where the whirling world was. All they knew was that the Dao scriptures had been passed down from the whirling world. Yi Xian gazed at them and smiled. To tell you the truth, I'm the young master of the number 1 sect in the whirling world, the whirling school. I've come to this world for the sake of gathering the precious treasure of my whirling school, the Dao scriptures. The whirling school. Luoho gazed at Yi Xian with a doubtful expression. He knew that Yi Xian's forte was deception. Bai Dizzy suddenly smiled and said, Yi Xian, you say you're the young master of the whirling school. How do we know if you're telling the truth or not? Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. If I'm not wrong, the doubting sects should have investigated my Yi Xian's background. I'd like to ask, did you find out? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian smiled and said, do you know why you didn't find out? Because it's very simple, I'm from the whirling world. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Deception continued to deceive. Yi Xian smiled and said, do you know why I was able to gather the 5 Dao scriptures? Because they originally belonged to my whirling world. Do you know who that woman who stopped the Dao ancestor was? She's also from the whirling world. Saying this, he looked at Luoho and said, Senior Luoho, what's a mere 10 top quality spirit veins? When I return in the future, my whirling school can give you 20-30. Luoho was silent. Bai Dizzy looked at Luoho and said, do you really believe what he said? Luoho suddenly said, as far as I know, when you went to the doubting world, you used a little white fellow to absorb all the spirit chi in the doubting world and took away more than 100 dragon veins in the doubting world. Yi Xian said, Senior guessed correctly. That was the spirit ancestor. The spirit ancestor. Hearing this, Luoho's expression became extremely grave. The spirit ancestor. That was only a legend. Yi Xian smiled and said, her name is Xiao Bai and she's also from the whirling world. When I went to the doubting world last time, I asked her to help. Saying this, he raised the gourd in his hand and said, this gourd is called the Heaven and Earth gourd and it's the number 1 treasure of my whirling school. It contains the power of heaven and earth. Anyone who enters it, even if they're at the Dao defense realm, will turn into a puddle of blood. Saying this, he looked at Bai Dizzy and said, my whirling school has already regarded the doubting world as our mortal enemy. In a few days an army will come. Old man, do you know how many people will come? 100,000. 100,000 Dao defense realm experts. By then I'll flatten the doubting world. Just wait for your death. P.S. Tickets. Chapter 1380. 100,000 Dao defense state. Hearing Yi Xian's words, everyone's expression became a bit strange. Even Qi Yaoyao shook her head. What did 100,000 Dao defense state mean? The Dao Ting and the Dao tomb combined didn't exceed 200 Dao defense state. 100,000. Was this a cabbage? Seeing everyone's expression, Yi Xian said, you don't believe me? Next to him, Bai Dizzy said indifferently, your mouth is yours. You can even say 200,000. Yi Xian said with a smile, everyone, don't forget that the Dao scripture came from our whirling world. The Dao scripture used to be a complete Dao scripture. In our whirling world, the Dao scripture's martial arts inheritance is the most complete. In our place, Dao proving is like a dog walking all over the place. At this moment, Zhen Wu suddenly said, since the whirling world is so strong, why don't you call them over to destroy the doubting? Hearing this, Luoho looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy and said with a smile, Bai Di Xingjun, you're so smart. You should know why, right? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. I don't know. I want to hear your lies. Yi Xian. At this moment, Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, there are 2 reasons. First, it should be very difficult for the whirling world to come here, just like how we can't go to the whirling world. Speaking of this, she looked at Yi Xian. They want to train you. Yi Xian said with a smile, it's not that they want to train me. It's that I want to train myself. Qi Yaoyao asked, what do you mean? Yi Xian looked at Luoho and said with a smile, Senior Luoho, do you think I, Yi Xian, can destroy the doubting? Luoho shook his head. No. Yi Xian asked again, if not now, what about the future? Luoho wanted to say something but stopped. The current Yi Xian indeed couldn't destroy the doubting. But what about the future? Who knew what would happen in the future? Meanwhile, Bai Dizzy said with a smile, Yi Xian, I've long since heard that you're good at bluffing, but I never expected you to be so good at it. Holding a broken gourd, he said that he was the young sect master of the Whirling World's #1 power, the Whirling School. Why didn't he say that he was the son of the plane of the 9 dimensions? In any case, we have never been to the 9 dimensions. Just as Yi Xian was about to say something, the gourd immortal suddenly shouted, Old man, who are you calling a broken gourd? Bai Dizzy glared at the gourd immortal. I'm talking about you. Enraged, the gourd immortal turned into a beam of white light and charged at Bai Dizzy. In the distance, true martial divine lord suddenly swung his sword. Boom. The gourd deity's attack was blocked. Immortal gourd scolded, Old man, have you heard of the whirling sect? Bai Dizzy was expressionless. I don't know. Immortal gourd. Bai Dizzy looked at the gourd immortal. What are you threatening me? Immortal gourd said angrily, Then have you heard of the 5th dimension Tendo? Hearing this, Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. What do you mean? Immortal gourd sneered. Let me tell you, the 5th dimension Tendo has been to the Whirling World and she is the honorary elder of the Whirling sect. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. Moon Yen Yen. Damn, this woman is from the Whirling sect? Yi Xian glanced at the gourd immortal. Damn, is this guy telling the truth? Sister Nyen has really been to the Whirling sect? At this moment, the gourd immortal said again, Old man, do you know how strong the Whirling sect is? Let me tell you, the Whirling sect has 100,000 Dao controlling realm experts, more than 10,000 Dao attainment realm experts and several hundred Dao attainment realm experts. And our sect master. Do you know how strong our sect master is? Bai Dizzy gazed at the gourd immortal with an emotionless expression. I don't. Why don't you tell me? The gourd immortal laughed coldly. Let me show you how strong my sect master is. Little kid Yi, take out that sword from the top of the pagoda. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Damn it. When did the owner of the sword from the top of the pagoda become the sect master of your whirling sect? Are you kidding me? Meanwhile, the gourd immortal said, Quickly take it out. Let them see it. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he withdrew the sword from the founding ancestor of the fallen immortal isle. He passed it to Luo Ho. Senior, please take a look. Luo Ho's expression instantly became solemn when he laid eyes on the sword. One could discern a person just by looking at the sword. The owner of this sword was absolutely not an ordinary person. Bai Dizzy and Emperor True Martial's expressions also became extremely solemn, especially Emperor True Martial because he was a swordsman. He was shocked when he saw the sword. Yi Xian looked at Emperor True Martial and said with a smile, Emperor True Martial, you are also a swordsman. Can you comment on this sword? Emperor True Martial glanced at Yi Xian, but he did not say anything. The gourd immortal suddenly sneered. Comment? Is he qualified? Yi Xian smiled. As the gourd immortal had said, Emperor True Martial was indeed not qualified to comment on this sword. The owner of this sword was on the same level as Qing. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Luo Ho and said with a smile, Senior Luo Ho, as the young sect master of the Whirling sect, I would like to cooperate with the land of Dao Tomb. Do you want to talk? Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. About what? Yi Xian smiled. About the Daoist scriptures and the top grade or veins. Luo Ho fell silent. Meanwhile, Bai Dizzy suddenly laughed. Luo Ho, you don't really believe his nonsense, do you? Luo Ho looked at Bai Dizzy. Then can you explain this sword, this gourd and the person behind it? Bai Dizzy did not say anything. Explain? How? He could not explain. In fact, for a moment he felt like he was from the Whirling World. That was the only way to explain everything that had happened. But he did not believe Yi Xian. His intuition told him that Yi Xian and the gourd were fooling him. Luo Ho glanced at Bai Dizzy and said, Bai Di Xing, the land of Dao Tomb has been investigating Yi Xian's background. I believe that your doubting has been investigating as well. But we could not find anything. He and the person behind him are too mysterious. Almost untraceable. But if Yi Xian is from the Whirling World, then everything can be explained. What do you think? Doubting looked at Luo Ho. Luo Ho, he killed the Divine Lady. Luo Ho turned to look at Yi Xian. Did you kill the Divine Lady? Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. I didn't kill her, Doubting killed her. Luo Ho looked at Bai Di Xing. Doubting killed her. Bai Di Xing looked at Yi Xian and sneered. Yi Xian, you are an outstanding person. What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it? Yi Xian smiled. Bai Dixing, then tell me, why did I kill the Divine Lady? What reason do I have to kill the Divine Lady? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian for a moment, then turned to look at Luo Ho. It seems that the Dao Tomb wants to protect Yi Xian. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Young Master Yi, do you have anything to say? Yi Xian smiled. If the Dao scripture is gathered, I will share it with the Dao Tomb. I will keep my promise. Luo Ho smiled. I believe you. He still believed in Yi Xian's character, because Yi Xian had previously shared the Dao scripture with everyone in the fifth dimension. Both White Emperor's and Zhen Wu's faces darkened when they saw this. Luo Ho changed his mind. Why did Luo Ho change his mind? Simple benefits. If Moon Yanyan was still here, even if Yi Xian did not move out of the whirling world, he would still choose to ally with the fifth dimension. But Moon Yanyan was not here. Only Yi Xian's fifth dimension had no value. Instead, Yi Xian might become a great enemy in the future. Therefore he chose to give up on Yi Xian. Giving up on Yi Xian could only bring him benefits. But now he chose to help Yi Xian. Because of Yi Xian's identity. The young master of the whirling world. When a person's strength reached a certain level, others would not see him as a threat. Instead, they would think of ways to become his ally. And having a backer was also a kind of strength. Bai Dizzy suddenly looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Yi Xian, this is the first time I've seen someone with such a strong mouth. With just a few words, you changed your fate. If the 3,000 great Daos had a Dao of the mouth, you could definitely achieve Dao. Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy and smiled. Bai Dixing Jun, I know that you have been investigating my bloodline power and the plain-dressed woman. But I want to ask, have you found anything? Bai Dizzy did not say anything. Yi Xian smiled. It seems that you haven't. But now that I have taken the initiative to tell you my origin, you are not happy. Why is that? Bai Dizzy shook his head and smiled. Yi Xian, it is impossible for you to collect all the Dao scriptures because I, the Dao Ting, have 2 Dao scriptures. Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. The day your Dao Ting is destroyed is the day I obtain the Dao scriptures. Destroy the Dao Ting. Bai Dizzy narrowed his eyes. You think you can do it? Yi Xian smiled and turned to look at Luo Ho. Senior Luo Ho, let's go. Luo Ho nodded. Right when Yi Xian and the others were about to leave, a white figure suddenly appeared before them. A white robe. Luo Ho's right hand that was hidden behind his back couldn't help but clench tightly when he saw the white robe. Along with the appearance of the white robe, countless experts suddenly appeared in the surroundings. The White Robe Army. There were 36 divine monarchs amongst them. Practically all the experts of the Doubting in the two-world abyss were here. Meanwhile, a few hundred experts suddenly appeared behind Luo Ho and the others. All of them were Dao breakers. The white robe gazed at Yi Xian. You must die today. As soon as he finished speaking, the spear in his hand suddenly transformed into a ray of white light that stabbed forward. The might of this spear could destroy the world. At the instant that the white robe attacked, Luo Ho suddenly smashed his fist forward. Bang! This punch caused the world here to become illusory. Rumble. An enormous explosion resounded and then everyone here was blasted back repeatedly. The white robe retreated by over 30 m while Luo Ho retreated by over 60 m. After the two of them stopped, the white robe gazed at Zhen Wu. Stop wasting time. Let's resolve everything today. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at Luo Ho, and his spear swept through everything before him. Suddenly Yi Xian turned around and fled. Everyone here was stunned by this scene. Meanwhile, Star Monarch Bai Di's expression changed drastically. Shit. He's going to act recklessly. Quickly stop him. Because Yi Xian was fleeing towards the Divine Palace. Chapter 1381. Now that all the experts of the Abyss of Two Worlds were here, who in the Divine Palace could stop Yi Xian? Yi Xian was trying to take advantage of the situation. Zhen Wu was about to stop Yi Xian when Qi Yaoyao suddenly stood in front of him. Qi Yaoyao smiled. Zhen Wu, let's fight? Zhen Wu was about to speak when Qi Yaoyao charged over. It didn't take long for a battle to break out. Meanwhile, Bai Dizzy was burning with anxiety. Damn it. Yi Xian was trying to take advantage of the situation. He was familiar with Yi Xian's style. Once Yi Xian went to the Divine Palace, nothing would be left of the Divine Palace. Most importantly, all the top experts were here and no one was a match for Yi Xian. He wanted both sides to stop. But the initiative was no longer in the hands of the Doubting. Whether they fought or made peace depended on the Dao Tomb. For a time, Bai Dizzy's expression was unsightly to the extreme. The Divine Palace. During the battle with the Doubting, the first place Zhou Xian thought of was the Divine Palace. There definitely weren't many experts in the Divine Palace right now. When Zhou Xian arrived at the Divine Palace, a few dozen powerful auras locked onto Zhou Xian. All of them were at the Dao Verification Realm. There wasn't a single Dao Control Realm expert. Zhou Xian walked towards the Divine Palace. Meanwhile, a man suddenly appeared in front of Zhou Xian. Fu Su's heart sank when he saw Zhou Xian. Something's wrong. Almost all the experts of the Doubting had gone to kill Zhou Xian, but now Zhou Xian had appeared in the Divine Palace. Obviously the Dao Tomb had interfered. Zhou Xian ignored Fu Su and walked towards the Divine Palace. He knew that there was a top-grade mine under the Divine Palace and the largest spirit vein in Doubting. At this time Fu Su suddenly blocked in front of Zhou Xian. He was about to speak when a voice sounded in his mind. Everyone from the Shen Palace, retreat. The voice of Bai Dizzy. Right now there was no one in the God Palace who could stop Zhou Xian. Attacking Zhou Xian would only be a meaningless sacrifice. Fu Su glanced at Zhou Xian. He did not refuse Bai Dizzy's order and retreated to the side. Zhou Xian did not choose to kill anyone. What he was thinking about now was that supreme-grade spiritual vein. With no one stopping him, Zhou Xian rushed directly to the underground of the Divine Palace. He saw the supreme-grade mineral vein. There were more than 50,000 fortune divine crystals in this top-grade or vein. Without any hesitation, Zhou Xian put away the more than 50,000 divine crystals of fortune. But this was not the end. Zhou Xian looked around. In the next moment his palm opened. A great power suddenly gathered. He was going to move the entire or vein away. For a moment the entire Divine Palace was shaking. Outside the Divine Palace, Fu Su and the others changed expression when they saw that Zhou Xian was going to move the ore vein away. At this time Bai Dizzy, who was hundreds of thousands of li away, also received the news. When he heard the news, Bai Dizzy could not help but curse. Zhou Xian, are you a bandit? Oh, you're either robbing or stealing. Are you a person? Anger this old man to death. And after Zhou Xian snatched that top-grade mineral vein, he did not choose to let it go. It had to be said that more than 30 supreme-grade mineral veins had collapsed. In a short while Zhou Xian had stolen another ore vein. At this moment Bai Dizzy could not sit still. Bai Dizzy looked at White Robe and the others who were still fighting and shouted, "Stop! Stop!" As soon as these words were spoken, all the experts in the surroundings stopped moving. Everyone looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy said gravely, "White Robe, can you kill Luo Ho and the others today?" "Kill Luo Ho and the others?" White Robe shook his head. While they had the upper hand, it was still not enough to completely kill Luo Ho and the others. If Luo Ho and the others were so easy to kill, Doubting would not have waited until now. Bai Dizzy looked at White Robe. "If you continue to fight, then Zhou Xian will steal all the ore veins." White Robe frowned. He had not expected that Zhou Xian would run over to steal ore veins instead of fighting. This person never played his cards according to common sense. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Let's go." With that he turned around and left. At this moment Qin Yaoyao stood in front of him. Bai Dizzy looked at Qin Yaoyao. "Do you want to perish together now?" The corners of Qin Yaoyao's mouth curled up. "Why not?" Bai Dizzy turned to look at Luo Ho. "If we fight to the death now, no one in your Dao Tomb can suppress White Robe. We will all die, but White Robe will not. Once Luo Ho and the others are gone, I guarantee you that White Robe will flatten everyone in your Dao Tomb. So if we fight now, we will perish together. Luo Ho, do you want to perish together?" The Dao Tomb and Doubting had fought for so many years, but they had never truly fought to the death. Because both sides were about the same in strength, fighting to the death would mean perishing together. Obviously they did not want to perish together. They were all developing. They hoped that a super genius would appear on their side. A super genius that could change the outcome of the battle. White Robe was also very strong, but not enough. But now one had appeared. Unfortunately, this person was not from the Dao court, nor was he from the burial mound of Dao. However, Zhou Xian was now on the side of the burial mound of Dao. So, Doubting was in a very bad situation. After a moment of silence, Luo Ho looked at Qin Yaoyao and shook his head. Obviously, he did not want to perish together with Doubting. If Zhou Xian was a genius from the Dao Tomb, then the Dao Tomb would do everything in their power to protect Zhou Xian's growth. Unfortunately, Zhou Xian was not. They could only cooperate with Zhou Xian. Bai Dizzy and the others turned and left. After Bai Dizzy and the others left, Qin Yaoyao said softly, "They will not give up." Luo Ho looked at Qin Yaoyao. "Do you believe Yi Xian's words?" Qin Yaoyao smiled. "Whirling world." Luo Ho nodded. Qi Yaoyao was the smartest person among the four great kings, or rather the smartest person in the Dao Tomb. That was why she could lead the experts of the Dao Tomb to fight against White Robe. If it was someone else, the Heaven Realm Abyss would have been doubting long ago. After a moment of silence, Qin Yaoyao said, "I believe him." Luo Ho looked at Qi Yaoyao and said nothing. Qin Yaoyao smiled. "Luo Ho, we can't find out the origin of that sword and the person behind it, nor can we explain it. But now there are 3 places that we can't step into. The first is the Milky Way realm, the second is the Whirling World, and the third is the legendary ancient god Abyss." Saying this, she looked into the distance. He can't be from the ancient god Abyss, so there is only one explanation. He is either from the Whirling World or the Milky Way realm, and he has the Qiankun gourd. Do you understand what I mean? Luo Ho nodded. He turned to the people behind him. "From now on, these Dao breakers will listen to your orders." Saying this, he turned and left. Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, "Not enough." Luo Ho stopped. After a moment of silence, he said, "I will arrange it." Saying this, he disappeared into the distance with Bitter King. Qin Yaoyao slowly closed her eyes. After a moment, she shook her head and smiled. "You really know how to fool people." Saying this, she turned and left. When Doubting chose to retreat, Yi Xian also immediately retreated. After returning to the Heavenly King City, Yi Xian's face was full of smiles. He had obtained a total of 4 top-quality mineral veins. One of them was a top-grade mine, and it was the largest mine in the Dao court. 4 top-quality mineral veins were enough to completely change the fate of the 5th dimension. At this time, Qin Yaoyao walked into the hall. Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. She smiled. "Congratulations on obtaining 4 top-quality spiritual veins." Yi Xian was silent. He knew that this woman in front of him was not easy to fool. Qin Yaoyao sat to the side and said, "I now represent the Dao Tomb to discuss our cooperation." Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Yaoyao, please speak." Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. 20 top-quality mineral veins. Within 2 years, you have to give the Dao Tomb 20 top-quality spiritual veins. Yi Xian was silent. 2 years. Qin Yaoyao continued. "In addition, if you collect the Dao scripture in the future, you have to share it with us." Yi Xian still did not speak. Qin Yaoyao raised her teacup and took a sip. "Also, we want to meet someone." Yi Xian asked, "Who?" Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. "It would be best if it is a woman in a plain dress." Yi Xian shook his head. Qi Yaoyao said, "Your sister has a powerful soul within her. This powerful soul forced the Dao ancestor back with one punch. We can meet her." Yi Xian thought for a moment. "I will think of a way." Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. "Not think of a way, but we must meet her. If we don't see the person behind you, we won't believe that you're some bullshit young sect master of the whirling sect." Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. "Miss Yaoyao, do you believe me?" Qin Yaoyao smiled. "It doesn't matter if I believe you or not. Because I'm not the boss of the Dao Tomb. Understand?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Qin Yaoyao put down her teacup and said, "We know that you have someone behind you. However, we've never come into contact with you. So we don't believe you. It's very simple to dispel our doubts. We just have to meet the person behind you with our own eyes. Any one of them will do. Of course, they have to be strong." Yi Xian nodded. "I will." Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. "We will protect you during these 2 years. Even if the Dao ancestor appears, we will. However, you have to bring us benefits during this period." Yi Xian fell silent. Qin Yaoyao stood up and walked over to the entrance of the hall. She looked up into the sky. "During this period, you can use the resources of the Dao Tomb. However, you can't attain the Dao control realm. Because if you dare to charge into the Dao control realm, then the doubting realm will definitely fight you to the death, and they'll do it even if they have to take us down with them. You're at the Dao verification realm and you're at the Dao control realm. So, in order to prevent the situation you're in and the Dao Tomb from becoming even more difficult, don't charge into the Dao control realm for now." Yi Xian remained silent. Qi Yaoyao continued. "If you're able to gather all 8 scriptures in the future, then the Dao Tomb will offer the last one to you. Of course, the precondition is that you're really the young sect master of the whirling world. As she spoke, she turned around to look at Zhou Xian. I'm done. It's your turn now. Zhou Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, I want to take a look at the Dao scripture in the Dao tomb. Qing Yaoyao shook her head. No. We'll give it to you once you've gathered all 8 scriptures. Not now. Zhou Xian hurriedly said, I'll just take a look. I won't take it away. Qi Yaoyao still shook her head. Zhou Xian ran over to Qing Yaoyao and hugged her arm. He begged, just one look. One look is enough. Looking at Zhou Xian, Qing Yaoyao said, it's meaningless for you to look at it. Zhou Xian said seriously, I have a brother called the 9th floor. He's at the end of his lifespan and he'll die in a few days. His last wish is to take a look at that Dao scripture, the 9th floor. P.S. Tickets are just fleeting clouds. I've already seen through it. Have you? If you have, then vote for it. It's useless to keep it. Chapter 1382. Inside the hall, Qian Yaoyao looked at Zhou Xian with a silent smile. Zhou Xian blushed with shame. This woman wasn't easy to fool. At this moment Qian Yaoyao suddenly said, Tell me, why do you want to see that scripture? Zhou Xian said solemnly, To improve. Qian Yaoyao looked at Zhou Xian. That scripture won't be of much use to you. Zhou Xian was puzzled. Why? Qian Yaoyao smiled. Because it's too profound, you won't understand it now. Just as Zhou Xian was about to speak, Qian Yaoyao continued, The later scriptures are more profound than the previous ones. As far as I know, the 5th scripture in your hand is enough for one to reach the Dao manipulation realm, but after that is Dao attainment. Do you know how many Dao attainment experts there are in this world? Zhou Xian shook his head. I don't know. Qi Yaoyao said, There are only 2 people in the Dao tomb and 2 people in the doubting realm. What you see now, be it White Robe or Zhen Wu, are only at the Dao manipulation realm. Luo Ho and I are the same. Zhou Xian said solemnly, Miss Yaoyao, there are strong and weak in the Dao manipulation realm, right? Qin Yaoyao nodded. Of course. The Dao manipulation realm is divided into 3 levels, the initial realm, the ascendant realm and the defense realm. Luo Ho, White Robe and I are all at the defense realm, the true Dao manipulation realm. There are also strong and weak in the defense realm, but it depends on one's combat ability. Zhou Xian said solemnly, Dao ancestors are Dao attainment? Qin Yaoyao nodded. Yes. So is the Lord of the Dao tomb. Zhou Xian was silent. Qian Yaoyao continued, The scripture in the Dao tomb can help one achieve Dao attainment, but do you really think you can achieve Dao attainment just by looking at a scripture? If it was really that simple, then the Dao tomb and the doubting world would already be filled with Daoists. If you want to achieve the Dao, you must first reach the peak of the Dao defense realm, which is the defense realm. Moreover, this is only the foundation. If you want to go further, it will depend on your own state of mind and understanding of the Dao. Zhou Xian said solemnly, Can you elaborate? Qian Yaoyao smiled and said, The 3,000 great Daos all have their own Dao. If you want to achieve Dao, you need something of your own. For example, the reincarnation great Dao that you obtained. If you want to achieve Dao, you have to create something similar. Do you understand? Zhou Xian nodded. Understood. Qian Yaoyao said softly, Achieving the Dao is easier said than done. Since ancient times, there have been very few who have attained the Dao. Zhou Xian suddenly said, I still want to see. He didn't want to use the Dao scripture to achieve Dao, but he wanted to learn the Dao scripture martial arts in the Dao scripture. His Dao sword could be said to be a threat to an expert of Qian Yaoyao's level. And he had heard from Destiny knowing that the Dao scripture martial arts in the later stages were more powerful. After hearing Zhou Xian's words, Qian Yaoyao was silent for a moment, then said, You really want to see it? Zhou Xian nodded. Can you help me? Qian Yaoyao's status in the Dao tomb was not low. He knew that if this woman was willing to help, then there was a chance. Qi Yaoyao suddenly grabbed Zhou Xian's shoulder. In the next moment, she and Zhou Xian disappeared from the main hall. When they reappeared, they were already in front of Luo Ho. Luo Ho looked at the two of them. What's the matter? Qin Yaoyao smiled. He wants to see our Dao scripture. Luo Ho immediately shook his head. At this time Zhou Xian took out a storage ring and handed it to Luo Ho. Luo Ho glanced at the ring and saw 2 supreme-grade spirit veins inside. Luo Ho was silent. He was a little tempted, but he was hesitant. Qi Yaoyao suddenly smiled. What? Are you afraid that he'll attain the Dao? Luo Ho immediately put the storage ring away and said, "We can only look." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." Luo Ho opened his palm and an ancient scroll appeared in his hand. The Tao scripture. Yi Xian took the scroll and opened it. 2 words entered his eyes: attain the Tao. The 6th scroll, attain the Tao. Yi Xian opened the Tao scripture and looked at the first line. The highest virtue is like water. Water benefits all things but does not compete. Luo Ho and Xianxia were both looking at Yi Xian. Luo Ho was very curious about why Yi Xian wanted to look at the Tao scripture. Could it be that he wanted to attain the Tao? That was absolutely impossible. If Yi Xian attained the Tao just by looking at the Tao scripture, then that would be too abnormal. If it wasn't for the sake of attaining the Tao, then what was it for? He was very curious because Yi Xian had spent 2 supreme-grade spirit veins for it. Actually, Xianxia was very curious as well. Spending 2 supreme-grade spirit veins just to take a look at the Tao scripture was definitely worth it for others, but it was definitely not worth it for Yi Xian. Because Yi Xian's accomplishments weren't really related to the Tao scripture. Moreover, there wasn't much meaning for Yi Xian to look at the Tao scripture right now. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly put the Tao scripture away and returned it to Luo Ho. Luo Ho gazed at Yi Xian. "Did you gain anything?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Senior, I don't understand it at all. I regret my decision. Just return the spirit veins to me." Luo Ho's expression froze. Is that even something a human can say? Qi Yaoyao shook her head repeatedly as well. He's truly shameless. Luo Ho put the Tao scripture away and left. He had nothing to say to a shameless person. Yi Xian was a little helpless. He looked at Qian Yaoyao. "I really regret it." Qi Yaoyao gave Yi Xian a deep look. "No matter what you got, congratulations." With that, she turned and left. Yi Xian was silent where he was. This woman was extraordinarily shrewd. Yi Xian turned and left. As he turned, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Divine Palace. At this moment, Bai Dizzy, True Martial Divine Lord and White Robe were all present. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy and somewhat depressing. This time, not only did they fail to kill Yi Xian, but Yi Xian also stole 4 supreme-grade spirit veins. 4 supreme-grade spirit veins. Although it wasn't a serious loss, it wasn't a small one. Moreover, Yi Xian stole the biggest one. At this moment, True Martial suddenly said, "Is he really from the Whirling World?" Whirling World. Hearing this, White Robe frowned slightly. He looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy said in a deep voice, "It's possible." True Martial said, "How so?" Bai Dizzy said softly, "We can't find out the force behind him, including the woman in plain dress and the origin of his bloodline. If he really is from the Whirling World, then everything makes sense. But..." At this point, a cold light flashed in his eyes. "He is definitely not from the Whirling World." True Martial asked, "Why do you think so?" Bai Dizzy said, "If he really is from the Whirling World and it is as strong as he said, then the 5th dimension Tendo wouldn't have fallen. Moreover, he could have asked the Whirling World to help him restore the 5th dimension. Not only that, he could have asked the Whirling World's powerhouses to destroy me and Doubting, but he didn't do so? Because of what? Because of training? Nonsense. He said he was the young sect master of the Whirling sect. Obviously, he wanted to trick Luo Ho and make Luo Ho stand on his side. Obviously, he succeeded in duping them." At this time, True Martial suddenly said, "If he is not from the Whirling World, then where is he from?" Bai Dizzy shook his head. "I can't find anything." As for the origin of Yi Xian's bloodline, he still couldn't find anything. Who is this Yi Xian's bloodline? At this time, White Robe suddenly said, "The 2 of you are always overcautious and never dare to be decisive. Let me tell you, if this person reaches the Imperial Tao, he will become extremely difficult to kill. At that time, the price I will have to pay for doubting will be at least 10 times greater than now." After saying this, he got up and left. The hall suddenly fell into silence. Yi Xian returned to the 5th dimension. After returning to the 5th dimension, he immediately took out the 2 top-grade mineral veins. With these 2 top-grade mineral veins, there would be more and more Tao validation powerhouses in the 5th dimension. In addition, he also distributed the Fortune Divine crystals he obtained from the Divine Palace to Enlancio and the others. This was because Enlancio, Arrow, and the others would be the easiest to reach Tao validation. Once they reached Tao validation with their battle strength, they could even kill Imperial Tao powerhouses. Currently, there were more and more self-release powerhouses in the 5th dimension, but Dao validation powerhouses were still too few. However, with the fortune divine crystals and top-grade mineral veins, Xian believed that in the near future, there would be more and more powerhouses in the fifth dimension. What was worth mentioning was that there were many spirits in the fifth dimension. These spirits were all brought over by Xian and Guan Yin from various worlds. If the fifth dimension wanted to completely recover, it needed these spirits. The existence of these spirits would make the spiritual qi in the fifth dimension more and more. In order to invite these spirits to the fifth dimension, Xian put in a lot of effort. Not only did he let Xiao Linger personally swindle them, as long as these spirits came to the fifth dimension he would give them purple qi. Although his purple qi was not as pure as the little white guys, it was still a great help to these spirits. In addition, after these spirits came to the fifth dimension their status was also very high. In the entire fifth dimension no one dared to harm these spirits. It could be said that these spirits could do whatever they wanted in the fifth dimension. Fortunately, these spirits were naturally kind and would not act recklessly. In short, with the purple qi and Xiao Linger swindle, there would be spirits coming to the fifth dimension almost every day. In the room, Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, his eyes slowly closed. Dao Scripture Martial Arts. The Dao Scripture in the Dao Tomb also contained a Dao Scripture Martial Arts, and he and Yi Jiming had already obtained that Dao Scripture Martial Arts. Dao Scripture Body Refinement. The Dao Scripture Martial Arts in the Dao Scripture in the Dao Tomb was a body refinement technique. To Xian this was really timely help. This was because what he wanted to improve the most was his physical body. His current physical body could fight against the Dao Proving Realm, but it would be a little difficult to fight against the Dao Defending Realm. He did not dare to take the damage of the Dao Defending Realm head-on. To put it simply, his current physical body was already somewhat insufficient. To him this Daoist cannon was like coal in a snowy day. As if thinking of something, Xian asked, "Jiming, how strong is this Dao Scripture body refinement?" He could not understand the Dao Scripture but Yi Jiming could. After a moment of silence, Yi Jiming said, "If you successfully cultivate it, your physical body will become a Dao body. This is a body refinement technique with no limit, you can continue to grow." Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, "What do you mean?" Yi Jiming said, "It means that once your physical body becomes a Dao body, you can continue to grow, you can reach the Dao Defending Realm, you can achieve Dao and even beyond. This Dao body is the first body refinement technique in the Dao Scripture." As she spoke she paused, then said, "There is no other." Chapter 1383. The Dao Physique. After that, Yi Jiming continued to explain the Dao Physique to Yi Xian. What was the Dao Physique? It was the Grand Dao Physique. The Dao Scripture was the origin of all martial civilizations. It could be said that the universe could be divided into two types of martial civilizations. One was the Dao Scripture martial Dao civilization and the other wasn't. As for the Dao Scripture's body tempering technique, it was number one in the 3,000 great Daos without a doubt. Once he attained the Dao Physique, then his body could attain the Dao, control the Dao, attain the Dao. At that time his body would even be stronger than his sword Dao. Yi Xian started to cultivate the Dao Physique under Yi Jiming's guidance. Heaven Abyss. Luo Ho, Bitter King, Qi Yaoyao and Zhang Man were all present within the hall of the Dao Tomb city. Besides them there was another person, Zhang Man. He was one of the 4 kings. 3 of the 4 kings of the Dao Tomb were already here. Luo Ho gazed at Kun Yaoyao. "Kun King, what do you think the Dao Tomb will do next?" Kun Yaoyao fell silent for a moment before she said, "They won't give up. Think about it. What would we do if we were in their shoes? It's very simple, we would stop at nothing to eliminate Yi Xian. So, I think they'll act as soon as the Dao Ancestor emerges from his closed-door cultivation." The Dao Ancestor. Everyone's expressions became slightly solemn when they heard this. After all, he was one of the supreme experts in the world. In the entire Dao Tomb, only the Overlord could contend against this person. However, the Overlord was still in closed-door cultivation. It could be said that the Dao Tomb would be in an even more difficult situation once the Dao Ancestor emerged from his closed-door cultivation. Meanwhile, Bitter King suddenly said, "What about the person standing behind Yi Xian?" All of them gazed at Bitter King and he spoke solemnly, "There's someone standing behind Yi Xian, but they've only acted at the critical moment. Don't all of you think that this is a little unusual?" Luo Ho said, "Just be frank." Bitter King spoke softly, "Have all of you noticed that the person behind him seems to be training Yi Xian?" "Training Yi Xian?" Luo Ho was silent. Bitter King continued. This person is definitely not simple. His life is like cheating. This kind of person's background is definitely not simple, especially his bloodline. Even the goddess-devouring bloodline is far inferior to the power of his bloodline. Neither the doubting world nor the Dao tomb can find the origin of his bloodline. This means that even if the force behind him is not as powerful as the Saha world, it is definitely not simple. As he spoke, he looked towards Huan Yaoyao. Yao Monarch, what do you think? Qing Yaoyao smiled and said, Aku, you're right. It doesn't matter if the person behind him is the Whirling World's Whirling sect or not. What's important is that the force behind him is powerful. That's enough. As she spoke, she glanced at the crowd. Everyone, can we reconcile with the doubting? Everyone fell silent. Could the land of the Dao tomb and the doubting be reconciled? Obviously not. Qi Yaoyao continued. There's no way we can reconcile with the doubting. Even if we want to develop peacefully, the doubting won't allow it. Bai Dizzy and his people have always wanted to restore the order of the past, and we are the biggest obstacle in their way. If this continues, the land of the Dao tomb will not be able to defeat them. Therefore, in my opinion, the land of the Dao tomb and the doubting will have to fight sooner or later. Since there will be a fight sooner or later, why don't we ally with Yi Xian? Aku said solemnly, if we join forces with Yi Xian to destroy the doubting, then Yi Xian. Huan Yaoyao looked towards Aku. Are you trying to say that Yi Xian will replace the doubting as our greatest enemy? Aku nodded. Huan Yaoyao smiled and said, why would you think that? Aku, do you know? If Yi Xian is willing to let go of his hatred and surrender to the doubting will definitely accept him. Aku was silent. Qi Yaoyao said again, who is our greatest threat now? It's the doubting, not Yi Xian. There is no conflict of interest between us and Yi Xian, nor is there any enmity. So why should we choose to be enemies with him? We can ally with him and destroy the doubting together. Also, have any of you thought about how strong the force behind Yi Xian is? Let's not talk about others, let's talk about this fifth dimension Tendo. She hasn't revealed her strength, but have any of you thought that there could be such a powerful person in this world? Everyone was silent. Moon Yanyan. This woman's strength far exceeded everyone's expectations. She destroyed a Dao ancestor's body with only 30% of her strength. How terrifying was her strength? Huan Yaoyao continued. Also, the power of Yi Xian's bloodline must be beyond everyone's expectations. Why don't you all think about the source of this bloodline power? And those two swords on him, just how powerful are the masters of those two swords? Everyone was silent. Huan Yaoyao smiled. So, it doesn't matter if he's the young sect master of the Whirling sect. What's important is that the force behind him is strong enough. Just as Aku said, although this force doesn't show itself often, haven't you all noticed? Whenever Yi Xian is in danger of death, there will always be someone to help him. Luo Ho looked at Huan Yaoyao. Is the force behind him really training him? Huan Yaoyao chuckled. Who knows? Maybe they're letting him go, or maybe they can't care about him for now. In any case, it's fine as long as there's someone behind him. Also, don't forget about Yi Xian himself. If he reaches the Dao controlling realm, none of us here will be able to kill him. Beside her, Zhang Man frowned. Is it that exaggerated? Yes. It wasn't Zhang Man who spoke but Luo Ho. Zhang Man gazed at Luo Ho and Luo Ho spoke softly. Once he attains the Dao controlling realm, then it won't be impossible for any one of us here to kill him, but it will be extremely difficult. His sword Dao and bloodline power can't be underestimated. Meanwhile, Qi Yaoyao continued, actually the more monstrous he is, the better it is for us. As for whether he'll become a threat to us in the future, do you think he's more reliable or doubting? All of them fell silent. Compared to doubting, they were more willing to choose Yi Xian. Besides being shameless, Yi Xian's character wasn't bad at all. At the very least, they'd never heard of Yi Xian doing anything immoral or going back on his word. Huan Yaoyao stood up. Let's discuss how we should deal with the Dao ancestor who's about to come out of his closed-door cultivation. Dao ancestor. The expressions of everyone here gradually became solemn. In the fifth dimension, Yi Xian had been in closed-door cultivation all this time, cultivating the Dao physique. The Dao scripture contained the detailed cultivation method of the Dao physique. Coupled with Yi Jiming's explanation, Yi Xian's cultivation went smoothly. It could be said that the more Yi Xian cultivated, the more excited he became, because he discovered the strength of this Dao physique. Dao physique. The Dao scripture body tempering technique was truly terrifying. It was at least several times more terrifying than the Dao fist technique. Now he was even more looking forward to the Dao scripture martial arts. In a certain courtyard, a petite girl sat cross-legged on the ground. Around her, a powerful sword intent was emanating. This person was Xianxia. Xianxia had been in closed-door cultivation all this time. After an unknown period of time, Xianxia suddenly opened her eyes. In the next moment, the sound of a sword suddenly soared into the sky from the courtyard. At the same time, a powerful aura suddenly shook around Xianxia. In an instant, the courtyard she was in turned into dust. Breakthrough. Dao validation. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly appeared in the field. Looking at Xianxia in the distance, Guan Yin's eyes were filled with excitement. Xianxia had broken through. Xianxia and Lanxiu and the others were the focus of cultivation. It could be said that the fortune crystals that Zhou Xian brought back were given to the few with the best talent. There was no other way. The current fifth dimension did not have the ability to cultivate everyone to Dao validation. They could only choose a few especially outstanding people. Xianxia opened her palm and a sword appeared in her hand. She looked up at the horizon, and there was a trace of a strange color in her eyes. Guan Yin walked in front of Xianxia. Xianxia, are you okay? Xianxia slowly closed her eyes. After a long silence, she chuckled. I'm still me. Guan Yin was puzzled by what he heard. Xianxia suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Guan Yin. Where is he? Guan Yin asked. Zhou Xian. Xianxia nodded. Guan Yin said, he has been in closed-door cultivation ever since he came back. Xianxia nodded slightly. I need to go somewhere. If he is in trouble, contact me. After saying that, she turned around and left with her sword. Guan Yin hurriedly asked, where are you going? Xianxia stopped and said softly, third dimension. After saying that, she turned into a sword light and disappeared into the horizon. Third dimension? Guan Yin furrowed his brows. A moment later, Guan Yin turned around and left. No matter what, for the fifth dimension, Xiaoqi's breakthrough was a good thing. Xiaoqi had already broken through, so Lanxiu and the others were definitely not far away. These people were not any less talented than Xiaoqi. Of course, Xiaoqi was a little special. Guan Yin arrived in front of Zhou Xian's room. After Zhou Xian returned, he had been in closed-door cultivation for several days. During these days, Zhou Xian did not contact the outside world. Therefore, she did not know what Zhou Xian was doing. As if thinking of something, Guan Yin sighed. Could be said that if there was no Zhou Xian, there would be no fifth dimension. The current fifth dimension was not any worse than other places. The experts of the fifth dimension were not willing to leave. Not only that, some experts from the Dao world and the sixth dimension had taken the initiative to come to the fifth dimension. Here there were Dao scriptures and cultivation resources. Who was not willing to come? Moreover, the current fifth dimension was very united, unprecedentedly united. She knew that all of this was because of Zhou Xian. If something happened to Zhou Xian, then the entire fifth dimension would instantly change. The human heart was something that could not be understood. She and Zhou Xian could no longer change the thoughts of this generation. However, they could change the next generation and let them truly love this universe. This was Zhou Xian's true goal. He wanted everyone to recognize the fifth dimension and treat it as their home. After a moment, Guan Yin turned around and left. Somewhere in the starry sky, Moon Yanyan was quietly lying in the starry sky. The surroundings were silent. Around him, more and more strange energy gathered towards Moon Yanyan's body. P.S. More and more monthly votes are gathering towards Green Phoenix, Apex. Chapter 1384. Half a month later, Zhou Xian finally walked out of the room. Outside the room, Zhou Xian looked up at the sky. He closed his eyes and spread his arms. His body became illusory. At this moment, his body seemed to be one with heaven and earth. Dao body. After half a month, under Yi Jiming's guidance, he finally succeeded in cultivating this Dao body. The reason why it was so fast was that his physical body had a strong foundation. Before his physical body reached Dao body, his physical body was already top-notch. Now that his physical body had become a Daoist body, even the gourd deity could not melt him. It could be said that among the Dao defense realm, only White Robe and Zhenwu could pose a threat to his physical body. However, if they wanted to kill him, it would not be as easy as before. Now he could completely rely on his invincible physical body to fight against Zhenwu and White Robe. In short, he was more tanned and harder to die. In addition, this Dao scripture could also be improved. His physical body could reach Dao defense realm, Dao attainment realm. Within the scope of Dao scripture martial arts, there was no upper limit for Dao scripture body tempering. This was a Dao scripture body tempering that could continue to grow. At this moment, Guan Yin appeared beside Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and asked, "You broke through?" Yi Xian nodded. Guan Yin smiled sweetly, "Congratulations." The improvement of Yi Xian's strength was beneficial to the entire fifth dimension. Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin. "How is the fifth dimension now?" Guan Yin's lips curled up. "We have more than 3,000 spirits. These spirits are now living in our fifth dimension for a long time." Yi Xian nodded. "You must give them preferential treatment." The help these 3,000 spirits could provide to the fifth dimension was immeasurable. Guan Yin nodded. "Very preferential treatment. Also, Xiao Linger has become the boss of these spirits." Yi Xian blinked. "I became the boss?" Ever since the recruitment of the spirits of heaven and earth began, Yi Xian had given Xiao Linger full authority to entertain these spirits. This was because it was easier for Xiao Linger to gain the trust of these spirits. Normally, heaven and earth spirits would not believe in humans. Little did he expect that Xiao Linger would become the boss. Guan Yin laughed and said, "Yes, she is already the boss of all the spirits. Moreover, she also created a sect called the Spirit Sect. Inside are all the spirits of heaven and earth, and she is the sect master." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Come, let's go take a look at the Spirit Sect." Guan Yin smiled. "All right." Very quickly, the two of them arrived at the Spirit Sect. The Spirit Sect was built in the depths of a large mountain. As soon as the two of them entered the mountain, Yi Xian sensed an incomparably pure spiritual energy. The spiritual qi here was too rich. It was in no way inferior to the Dao tomb. Yi Xian was a little surprised. At this time, Guan Yin suddenly said, "Because there are many spirits of heaven and earth here, I placed 6 top-grade dragon veins here. In addition to the spirits of heaven and earth themselves, the spiritual qi here is at least 10 times richer than in other places." She paused for a moment, then continued, "There is no other way. When these spirits come to our fifth dimension, we have to give them the best conditions. Moreover, it is very worth it. After these spirits come, they will help us restore the imbalance of the spiritual qi in certain places." Yi Xian laughed. "These spirits of heaven and earth are generally very kind. If we treat them sincerely, they will also follow us sincerely." Guan Yin nodded. She had come into contact with these spirits of heaven and earth before. They were indeed kind and easy to get along with. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the Spirit Sect. It had to be said that the Spirit Sect was built quite well. There were more than 10 halls, and they were all very large. At first glance, it looked very imposing. At this time, a ball of white light suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Guan Yin. In the white light there was a pair of eyes. When she saw Yi Xian, her eyes immediately became alert. Vigilance immediately appeared in her eyes, but when she saw Guan Yin, the vigilance in her eyes turned into joy. The ball of white light floated in front of Guan Yin and said in a crisp voice, "Sister Guan Yin." Guan Yin smiled slightly. "It's Xiaoxing." The white light hurriedly nodded. "It's me." Guan Yin laughed. "Where is your sect master?" Xiaoxing turned her head to take a look, then said, "Sect master is in a meeting." Meeting. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression became a little strange. "This Xiao Linger is in a meeting?" Guan Yin blinked. "Can you take us to have a look?" Xiaoxing nodded. "Yes." As she spoke, she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at Yi Xian. Guan Yin laughed. "He is your sect master's elder brother." "Elder brother?" Xiaoxing blinked. "Elder brother?" Yi Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Yes." Xiaoxing glanced at Yi Xian, her eyes full of curiosity. "Sect master said that you are very powerful. Are you really that powerful?" Yi Xian laughed and then spread out his palm. Dozens of wisps of purple gas floated toward Xiaoxing. When she saw the purple gas, Xiaoxing suddenly became excited. She looked at Yi Xian and said with a trembling voice, "Is it for me?" Yi Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Yes." Xiaoxing hurriedly said, "Oh, thank you, thank you." Very excited, very excited. The purple gas was really useful to them. If the purple gas was a little purer, it would be enough to change the fate of these spirits. After a while, Xiaoxing brought Yi Xian and Guan Yin to the main hall of the Spirit Palace. At this time, There were more than 3,000 spirits gathered on the bluestone square below the main hall. When he saw more than 3,000 spirits, Xian was a little shocked. When these spirits gathered together, it was really too shocking. He had never seen so many spirits. At this moment, the spiritual energy on the bluestone square was so rich that even the 33 levels of doubting could not compare to it. In the past, these spirits were equivalent to rogue cultivators and they lived in fear. Because of their own reasons, many humans had always wanted to obtain them. Therefore, most of the spirits of heaven and earth hid in the mountains and forests. Now Xian gathered them together. Not only did he protect them, but he also gave them the best resources and status. Here, humans were very respectful when they saw them. No one dared to be disrespectful to them. Moreover, everyone's respect for them came from the bottom of their hearts because they had indeed helped the fifth dimension a lot. They didn't do anything, they were just helping. In the distance, Xiaolinger was wearing a white dress and holding a staff in her hand. She looked at the spirits below with a calm expression, very much like a big sister. Below, all the spirits were looking at Xiaolinger. They were also very convinced of Xiaolinger. This was because Xiaolinger was the highest ranked among them. In addition, Xiaolinger's status in the fifth dimension was unparalleled. Who didn't know that Xian treated her like a younger sister? Most importantly, Xiaolinger had a good relationship with the little white fellow. Who was that little guy? The spirit ancestor. The spirit ancestor of heaven and earth. In the distance, Xiaolinger suddenly pressed her hand down lightly, and the surroundings instantly fell silent. Very imposing. Xiaolinger glanced at the spirits here and said, "All of you have to get even more companions. Here there is food to eat, a place to live, and there are people to protect everyone. Anyone who finds a companion, I will give them 100 strands of violet energy. Plus 30 fortune divine crystals." With that, she waved her right hand, and a large pile of fortune divine crystals appeared in front of her. There were more than 1,000 fortune divine crystals. She got it from Xian. She'd asked for it. Xian had given her 10,000 fortune divine crystals, and he hadn't asked her why she wanted them. In any case, he'd given them to her if she wanted them. However, Xian hadn't expected that Xiaolinger would use them for this. The eyes of many spirits here instantly lit up when they saw the fortune divine crystals. Fortune divine crystals. They were very useful to them as well, because they contained extremely pure energy within them, and it would be extremely beneficial to them if they absorbed it. Little Ling continued, "Call a little friend over, 30 creation divine crystals. If you call 2 over, 70. If you call 3 over, 150. If you call more than 5 over, directly give 300 creation divine crystals and 300 wisps of purple aura. As for the companions all of you call over, they will get fortune divine crystals and violet energy as well." All the spirits below instantly became excited when they heard this. 300 fortune divine crystals and 300 strands of violet energy. This was a good thing. Many of them were dumbfounded. They were actually very poor when they were independent cultivators, so they'd never even seen fortune divine crystals and violet energy before this. Meanwhile, Xiaolinger distributed the fortune divine crystals and violet energy to some of the spirits. All of them were from the companions she'd called over earlier. Some of the spirits here were extremely envious when they saw those spirits obtain the fortune divine crystals and violet energy. Meanwhile, Xiaolinger continued, "Everyone has a chance. So long as you call your companions over, you'll have it. Now go call them over. Don't worry, I'll send people to protect all of you." It didn't take long for the spirits here to shoot into the sky. They were going to look for companions. Even if humans did find companions, those spirits would be extremely vigilant because they didn't trust humans at all. However, it wouldn't be a problem if the spirits went to look for other spirits. The relationship between spirits wasn't as complicated as it was for humans. So, making the spirits look for other spirits could attract even more spirits over. After the spirits dispersed, Guan Yin, who stood by Xian's side, shook his head and smiled. "What a formidable little fellow." Xian nodded and smiled. "He really is formidable." As he spoke, he glanced at the direction that the spirits had left in the sky. Guan Yin said, "Don't worry, someone will protect them from the shadows." Xian nodded, "Take good care of them. Since they trust us, then we have to live up to their trust." Guan Yin nodded, "Of course." Meanwhile, Xiaolinger ran over to Xian and Guan Yin, and Xiaolinger grinned, "Big sister Guan Yin, big brother." Xian lightly rubbed Xiaolinger's little head and smiled. Was it fun? Xiaolinger hurriedly said, I wasn't playing, I was doing serious business. Xian laughed. Right? Let's do serious business. Xiaolinger blinked. Big brother, I still want the Fortune Divine crystals. You know, the development of our spirit sect requires a lot of money. Xian. At the side, Guanyin shook her head and smiled. Xian took out a storage ring and handed it to Xiaolinger. For you. Xiaolinger giggled and hurriedly took the storage ring. Xian said seriously, there are many places in the fifth dimension that require the help of these spirits. When the time comes, you have to cooperate with Big Sister Guanyin, understand? He knew that these spirits were very obedient to Xiaolinger. Xiaolinger hurriedly nodded. Of course. Xian was about to speak, but at this time the space in front of him trembled slightly. Xian frowned. Guanyin looked at Xian. What is it? Xian said in a low voice, I want to return to the dual realm abyss. After saying this, he directly turned around and disappeared. At the scene, Guanyin frowned deeply. Something happened? Chapter 1385. Two Realms Abyss Heavenly King Hall. Qi Yaoyao was already waiting for Xian the moment he entered the hall. Xian said solemnly, Did something happen? She nodded. It's not a bad thing, but it's not good either. Xian looked at her. What do you mean? Qin Yaoyao said in a low voice. A black vortex has appeared in the two worlds abyss. We can sense an extremely pure spiritual aura within it. Our initial estimate is that there are at least 10 supreme-grade spirit veins inside, and there might even be the legendary supreme-grade spirit veins. Xian frowned. Black vortex? How did it appear? She shook her head. We explored it. Do you know how deep this heaven realm abyss is? Xian shook his head. She said, the interior of this heaven realm abyss is bottomless. Even now we can't explore it completely. Xian was puzzled. Even the Dao Tomb and Doubting can't do it? She smiled. Do you know the origin of heaven realm abyss? Xian shook his head. He actually didn't know much about heaven realm abyss. She said softly, actually we don't know either. Xian was stunned. You don't know either? Qian Yao nodded. This place has existed longer than us and the Dao court. We've been exploring this heaven realm abyss all these years, but we still haven't fully explored it. Xian frowned. So mysterious? She smiled. It's not just mysterious. There's a flow of air in the depths of this heaven realm abyss. It's extremely strange, and even Dao-controlling experts can't resist it. The deeper we go, the stronger the flow. In the past 10 years, we in Doubting have explored heaven realm abyss, and more than 60 Dao-controlling experts have died. Xian said softly, in other words, none of you have been to the bottom of this heaven realm abyss? She nodded. According to my guess, the heaven realm abyss we've explored may not even be a third of it. 1/3. Xian was visibly moved. If less than a third of it had been excavated, then this heaven realm abyss would be extraordinarily terrifying. How many spirit veins were there in the depths of the heaven realm abyss? Just thinking about it made one's blood boil. Meanwhile, Qin Yaoyao suddenly said, Don't think too much about it. The deepest place we can probe is the dark realm. We can't even enter the dark realm right now. This time, the black vortex appeared at the edge of the dark realm. This time I asked you to come here because I want you to make a trip there. Is there any problem? Xian blinked. Me. Ting Yaoyao nodded. Xian was a little puzzled. You and Rahu are stronger. Why don't you go? Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, If we go, who is going to block the Doubting for you? Do you think the Doubting will just stand and watch when such a black vortex suddenly appears? They would definitely intervene. As for us, we have to stop White Robe and the others. No matter how I think about it, you're the most suitable. Xian grinned. Are there any benefits? Qin Yaoyao walked in front of Xian and looked at Xian. Are you afraid you won't be able to reap any benefits if you go there? Xian said seriously, Actually, I'm just asking. I'm an ally of the Dao Tomb. I Xian am duty-bound to do things for my allies. The corners of Qin Yaoyao's mouth curled up. I like your shamelessness. Xian, Qin Yaoyao returned to her seat. She picked up her teacup and took a small sip. After a short while she said, This is a fortuitous encounter. A fortuitous encounter for my Dao Tomb and a fortuitous encounter for you Xian. But I have to tell you this. The Doubting will definitely intervene. It's just that I don't know how they will intervene. All we can do is block White Robe and the others for you. You will have to face the remaining danger yourself. Is there a problem? Yi Xian shook his head. No problem. Qian Yaoyao nodded. Then go. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment. Miss Yaoyao, is the dark world dangerous? Qian Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. It's very dangerous for others, but I don't think it's that dangerous for you. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The corners of Qian Yaoyao's mouth curled up. Haven't you heard of this saying? A shameless person is invincible. I think you're invincible. What's a mere dark world to you? Yi Xian's face darkened. Was that even human? Qi Yaoyao suddenly said seriously, be careful of the doubting. Be careful of that black vortex as well. The sudden appearance of that black vortex isn't normal. You have to be careful. Yi Xian said in a low voice. Miss Yaoyao, have you gone in? Qian Yaoyao nodded. I have. However, I was only able to reach the edge of the black vortex. I can't take it any further. Yi Xian was puzzled. Then what makes all of you think that I can take it? Qian Yaoyao gazed at Yi Xian. Do you know what it is that I can't take it? Yi Xian was quite curious. What is it? Qian Yaoyao said softly, sword energy. Peerlessly powerful sword energy. Sword energy. Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, there's sword energy? Qian Yaoyao nodded. Extremely powerful sword energy. The reason we're letting you go is naturally not because we want you to give your life away. Since you can absorb sword energy, perhaps you can enter that vortex and investigate it. Yi Xian came to an understanding when he heard this. If it wasn't for this reason, the Dao Tomb probably wouldn't have told him about the black vortex at all. There are at least a dozen top-grade spirit veins in there. There are even transcendent-grade spirit veins. The Dao Tomb has come to find me because it has no other choice. When he thought up to this point, Yi Xian smiled and said, I'll go. Qian Yaoyao nodded lightly. Careful. Yi Xian stood up and left. Meanwhile, Qian Yaoyao suddenly said, have you broken through? Yi Xian turned around to look at Qian Yaoyao with a puzzled expression. No. Qian Yaoyao gazed at Yi Xian. You haven't? Yi Xian nodded. I'm still at the Dao corroboration realm. Qian Yaoyao smiled. I thought you'd broken through. Yi Xian smiled. Why does Miss Yaoyao say that? Qian Yaoyao took a sip of tea and said, do you know why a person's feet are whiter than their hands? Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Why? Qian Yaoyao smiled. Because your feet are always hidden. But if you're wearing sandals, then how would you hide them? Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said softly, thank you. With that he turned around and left. The moment he turned around, his expression was incomparably solemn. He knew that Qian Yaoyao had discovered his physical breakthrough. This time he had been careless. Although he had concealed his physical presence, he hadn't used the prison pagoda to conceal it. It was obvious that his current strength wasn't enough to hide from experts of Qian Yaoyao's level. He had to use the prison pagoda. Outside the hall, Yi Xian lightly patted his face and said softly, I have to be more careful. With that, he turned into a streak of sword light and disappeared into the distance. Inside the hall, Qian Yaoyao swirled the teacup in her hand and said softly, physical body, is it that scroll? Is it because of the Dao scripture? With that, she slowly closed her eyes. Divine Palace. By Dizzy, White Robe and the true martial Divine Lord were all here. They already knew about the black vortex in the dark world. At this moment, White Robe suddenly said, my people have found out that the black vortex isn't a plot of the Dao Tomb. However, the vortex contains extremely powerful sword qi. Luo Ho and Qian Yaoyao don't dare to enter it. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, Yi Xian will go. White Robe looked at Yi Xian. Why? Bai Dizzy said softly, because that shameless guy can absorb sword qi. With that he frowned slightly. What a coincidence. This black vortex seems to have appeared for Yi Xian. The true martial Divine Lord suddenly said, White Robe, you've been to the dark world. What's inside? White Robe was silent for a moment, then said, turbid qi, a lot of it. It can corrode a person's lifespan and physical body. True Martial frowned slightly. Can't resist it? White Robe shook his head. Difficult to resist. The deeper you go, the more turbid qi there is. If you come into contact with too much of it, you will enter the Angel Decay Stage 5 early. True Martial was silent. The Angel Decay Stage 5. Once you entered this state, you were not far from death. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, Can Yi Xian resist the turbid qi? White Robe shook his head. In terms of strength he can't. Far from it. But this person is quite mysterious. I'm not sure if he has any other way to resist the turbid qi. Bai Dizzy was silent. In his heart this Yi Xian was omnipotent. At this moment the true martial divine lord suddenly said, "This might be our chance. A chance to kill Yi Xian. Because after he enters the dark world the experts of the Dao tomb won't be able to enter. If we kill him in there the Dao tomb won't be able to intervene." White Robe shook his head. "We can't enter the Dao tomb either." The true martial divine lord suddenly said softly, "Taoist robe." Taoist robe. Bai Dizzy frowned. "Can it resist the turbid qi?" With that he looked at White Robe. After a moment of silence White Robe said, "It can resist it for about an hour. But the Taoist robe will be destroyed. Moreover Yi Xian will go to that small vortex but he might not enter the dark world. If he doesn't enter the dark world and stays at the edge of the dark world, the tomb of Dao will immediately attack us." The true martial divine lord said solemnly, "Bet that he will enter the dark world." Bet. Both Bai Dizzy and White Robe were silent. The true martial divine lord looked at White Robe. "If you attack Yi Xian alone how confident are you that you can kill him?" White Robe said, 80%. That's if he hasn't reached Dao Imperial. The true martial divine lord slowly closed his eyes. 80%. That's enough. It's worth the bet. With that he looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy stood up. "I'll go get the Taoist robe." With that he turned and disappeared. In the hall the true martial divine lord said softly, "Unfortunately this person isn't doubting. Otherwise he would be able to help us destroy the Dao tomb. If Yi Xian was doubting he would definitely have a chance to reach the level of a Dao ancestor in the future. Moreover if another expert of this level were to appear, then destroying the Dao tomb would be a piece of cake. Unfortunately Yi Xian wasn't doubting. Not only that but they had to get rid of Yi Xian. At all costs. Chapter 1386. Dark World. When Yi Xian arrived in the Dark World his expression turned grave. The Dark World was pitch black and within that pitch black space, there were some air currents that made him feel threatened. Turbid air. Even Dao manipulation experts would find it hard to resist these air currents. Yi Xian looked to his right and saw a pitch black vortex not far away. The vortex was huge and he could feel pure spiritual energy and sword qi in its depths. Sword qi. Yi Xian was curious just how strong was this sword qi. Even experts like Qian Yaoyao and Luo Ho found it hard to resist. Could it be left behind by the three swords? Yi Xian walked towards the black vortex. Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Be careful." Yi Xian nodded. He naturally didn't dare to be careless in a place like Heaven Abyss. Soon Yi Xian approached the black vortex. As if thinking of something he turned to look but there was no one in the distance. But he knew someone was in the dark. Some were from the Dao court and some were from the Dao tomb. Yi Xian was silent where he stood. Yi Jiming suddenly asked, "What is it?" Yi Xian chuckled, "What do you think doubting will do to kill me?" Yi Jiming was silent. Yi Xian looked at the black vortex and after a long silence he quickly walked into it. Somewhere in the dark Luo Ho whispered, "Can he even absorb the sword qi in there?" Bitter King and Qian Yaoyao were beside Luo Ho. Qian Yaoyao smiled, "We'll know soon enough." As she spoke she turned her head and looked somewhere. "What do you think the Dao court will do?" Bitter King said solemnly, "He won't give up." Qian Yaoyao slowly closed her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. Luo Ho suddenly said, "Why is there sword qi in there?" Qi Yaoyao said, "Because someone went in?" Who? Bitter King asked. Qian Yaoyao shook her head. "I don't know." As she spoke she glanced at the dark world in the distance and said softly, "Ever since I found out about Moon Yen, I've realized that we've become slightly weak." Before she met Moon Yen she had always felt that they were the most powerful people in this world. However, after meeting Moon Yen she suddenly realized that they were very weak. This was the way of the world. When you thought you had reached the ceiling little did you know that there was an even higher existence. On the other side Bai Dizzy and True Martial Divine Lord were watching in secret. They had investigated this new black vortex for a long time, but to no avail. They didn't fight over it because it was meaningless. There was a powerful sword qi inside. If they couldn't enter the Dao tomb they couldn't enter either. However Yi Xian could enter. Could Yi Xian absorb the sword qi inside? They were curious as well. The sword qi inside was no ordinary sword qi. Even experts like Qian Yaoyao and Luo Ho couldn't resist it. How terrifying was it? Could Yi Xian absorb such a powerful sword qi? After Yi Xian entered the vortex, a wave of pure spirit qi hit him in the face. Yi Xian quickened his pace and soon arrived at a starry sky. There was another world inside this vortex. The starry sky was deep and boundless. At this moment he suddenly turned around, because he sensed a strand of sword qi in the distant depths. An unfamiliar sword qi. He was more familiar with the sword qi of the three swords, but the sword qi before him didn't belong to any of them. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian walked toward the source of the sword qi. The further he went, the more serious Yi Xian's expression became. Not only did he feel a powerful sword qi but also a powerful sword force. It was countless times stronger than the true martial divine lord's sword force. At this moment Yi Xian was a little shocked. Apart from the three swords and Sister Nian, there was actually such a powerful swordsman in this world? Who was it? Yi Xian's curiosity grew. At this moment he suddenly stopped. A corpse floated dozens of feet in front of him. Yi Xian sized up the corpse. There was a sword mark on the corpse's throat. Single slash. Yi Xian walked up to the corpse and took a look at it. The body was still there but the soul was gone. It must have been annihilated. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He lifted his head and looked into the distance. What on earth was this place? Yi Xian's curiosity grew and he became even more cautious. Although he had cultivated a Dao body, that didn't mean he was invincible. He couldn't be arrogant at any time. Yi Xian continued walking forward. After walking for a short while he suddenly stopped. At this moment, a beam of sword energy cut through the air and slashed towards him. The sword qi was like a bolt of lightning. By the time Yi Xian sensed it, the sword qi was already in front of him. Yi Xian's expression changed. He didn't expect the sword qi to be so fast. At this moment he didn't even have a chance to fight back. He could only let the sword qi cut him. At this moment Yi Xian only hoped that his invincible sword body would be useful. As a tearing sound came, Yi Xian retreated almost 10,000 feet away. As soon as he stopped, the space around him cracked and the cracks spread tens of thousands of miles away in an instant. And there was a sword qi stuck in Yi Xian's chest. Yi Xian's body stiffened in the starry sky. His expression was extremely solemn. Because his body couldn't absorb the sword qi. However, the sword qi couldn't hurt him either. Even though the sword qi had entered his body, it didn't hurt him. However, he couldn't absorb the sword qi either. It was very strange. Even Yi Xian was confused. What's going on? Meanwhile, Yi Jiming suddenly said, the sword qi can't hurt you but your physique can't absorb it either. So there's only one explanation. Your invincible sword body is very strong, but you're not strong enough to absorb the sword qi. The sword qi's owner's attainments in the sword Dao might be similar to Moon Yanyan's, only inferior to three swords. Only inferior to three swords. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He looked into the distance. There's such a powerful swordsman in this world. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian slowly pulled out the sword qi. One could tell a person just by looking at the sword qi. Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn as he looked at the sword qi in his hand. The sword qi's owner's attainments in the sword Dao were probably only inferior to three swords. As for Sister Nian, he hadn't seen her at her peak, so he didn't know who was stronger between the sword qi's owner and Sister Nian. At this moment, Yi Jiming suddenly said, the sword qi isn't resisting? Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. Only now did he realize that the sword qi in his hand didn't resist? What's going on? Yi Xian looked at the sword qi in his hand. The sword qi was trembling slightly but it didn't resist him. Yi Jiming said in a low voice, don't tell me the sword qi's owner is related to you again. She was speechless towards Yi Xian. How many people does this guy have backing? Not to mention her, even he himself probably doesn't know. Wherever he goes he has backing. Yi Xian said in a low voice, I've never seen the sword qi's aura before, so I don't think I know the sword qi's owner. Yi Jiming said in a low voice, just because you don't know him doesn't mean he doesn't know you. Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Jiming continued, no matter what, since the sword qi isn't resisting you, it means that the sword qi's owner might know you. Let's go ahead and take a look. Yi Xian nodded slightly and put the sword qi away. Although the sword qi had left its owner with the sword Dao's attainments, the sword qi would last for at least 10,000 years. 15 minutes later, Yi Xian suddenly stopped on his sword. There was a top grate or vein not far away from him. A top grade ore vein. Yi Xian was slightly excited. He and the others had entered the ore vein, but when they entered, Yi Xian was stunned. This top grade ore vein was filled to the brim with fortune divine crystals. There were at least 300,000 of them. 300,000 divine fortune crystals. What did that mean? Yi Xian was so excited that he almost couldn't control himself. The ore vein here had not been developed by anyone, so it contained a large number of divine fortune crystals. Most importantly, these divine fortune crystals were different from the ones he had seen outside. They were completely different. These divine fortune crystals were the size of a fist and were dark purple in color. The energy contained within them was several times purer than the divine fortune crystals outside. At this moment, Yi Jiming suddenly said softly, "These divine fortune crystals have not been taken away by anyone. They can grow continuously in this ore vein. Congratulations, you're rich." Yi Xian was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. How many experts could be nurtured in the fifth dimension with more than 300,000 pure divine crystals of fortune? He could nurture a large number of Dao validation and Dao defense realm experts. Most importantly, there was more than just this top grade ore vein in this black hole. Thinking of this, Yi Xian couldn't help but laugh. Yi Xian hurriedly put away the divine fortune crystals. Not only did he put away the divine fortune crystals, but he also put away the entire ore vein. At this moment he also understood one thing, and that was that the longer these divine fortune crystals stayed in this ore vein, the better. After putting away the divine fortune crystals and the top grade ore vein, Yi Xian continued forward. At this moment, another sword chi slashed at him from afar. However, he didn't panic at all. As he expected, the sword chi stopped 5 feet in front of him. Yi Xian put away the sword chi. He continued forward. Along the way, Yi Xian walked with the wind, feeling very proud of himself. Along the way, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "Jiming, do you have any thoughts?" Yi Jiming was silent for a moment before saying, "Cheater." Yi Xian blinked. "What do you mean?" Yi Jiming said calmly, "I saw this phrase in an ancient book. It said that it came from the Milky Way realm. It means that if you don't abide by the rules, your life will be like cheaters, just like you are now." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Why does it sound like a bad phrase to me?" Yi Jiming said, "I don't know either. In any case, many of the words there are a bit strange. I looked at that ancient book and was also confused because I couldn't explain many of the words. For example, this cheater, what is cheater? What is cheater? Why is it combined to describe people who don't abide by the rules? I can't understand it." Yi Xian. P.S. I don't ask for votes, I don't ask for rewards, just write more and write a good book. Chapter 1387. Cheater? Yi Xian shook his head. "What a strange word." Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Don't dwell on this problem. It's meaningless." Yi Xian nodded and sped up. Along the way he encountered more sword chi, and he noticed that these sword chi were scattered in space and would attack anyone they saw. Obviously, a great battle had happened in this part of space. After flying on the sword for about an hour, Yi Xian saw another ore vein. There were over 200,000 fortune divine crystals in that ore vein. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian put away the ore vein. Now he had 2 top-grade ore veins and over 400,000 fortune divine crystals. This was simply a sudden windfall. Even though the number of fortune divine crystals was increasing, Yi Xian felt uneasy. There was clearly something wrong with this place. Besides sword chi and ore veins, he also saw corpses along the way. Judging from the corpses, they were all super experts when they were alive. After a while, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. In the starry sky not far away from him, there was a giant starship floating in the sky. The entire starship was like a ghost floating in the starry sky, extremely creepy and creepy. Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What the hell is that?" Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Be careful." Yi Xian nodded and walked towards the starship. When he got close to it, he felt a powerful aura again. Yi Xian stopped in his tracks and he became even more vigilant. Just as he was about to slip away, the starship shook violently, and then footsteps came from inside the starship. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. "Someone's here." Yi Xian looked at the starship in front of him. Under his gaze, an old man walked out from the starship. The old man wore a loose gray robe and he held a walking stick in his hand. His aura was faint and it was extremely strange. Yi Xian looked at the old man, but he didn't say a word. At this moment, the old man was also looking at Yi Xian. After a short moment, the old man suddenly said in a hoarse voice, Why aren't you afraid of the sword Qi? Yi Xian waved the sword in his hand. I'm also a swordsman. The elder stared at Yi Xian. Your attainments in the sword Dao are far inferior to the owner of this sword energy. Yi Xian said, all swordsmen in the world are one family. We don't fight each other. The old man frowned. What nonsense are you talking about? Yi Xian was speechless. The old man continued, those sword Qi won't hurt you. What is your relationship with the owner of the sword Qi? Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, it's my first time here so I don't know why that sword Qi didn't harm me. This time he wasn't fooling around. What a joke. If the owner of the sword Qi had a grudge against this old man, then wouldn't he be courting death? The old man looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian sized up the surroundings and said, Senior, where are we? The old man replied, the dark dimension. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, Senior, are you from the depths of the dark dimension? The old man shook his head. I'm from the outside world. Yi Xian blinked. The outside world. The old man gazed at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian's heart shook. Damn it. This old man wants to kill me. Because he sensed a strand of killing intent. Even though the old man's killing intent was very well concealed, he'd still noticed it. Because he'd attained his Dao through slaughter, so he was extremely sensitive to killing intent. The old man's right hand slowly clenched tightly within his wide sleeves. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, to tell you the truth, I'm here to look for my dad. The old man frowned slightly. That? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Senior, have you seen him? The old man gazed at Yi Xian. No. Damn it. Who knows who your dad is? Meanwhile, Yi Xian opened his palm. Instantly, the blood in his body trembled. Bloodline power. When he saw Yi Xian's bloodline power, the old man's expression changed. Yi Xian looked at the old man. My dad's bloodline is the same as mine. Senior, have you seen someone with such a bloodline? The old man stared fixedly at the boiling blood in Yi Xian's body. His expression gradually became solemn. Needless to say, he was quite shocked at this moment. What bloodline is this? It's actually so strong. Who is this young man in front of me? Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly retracted his bloodline power. He cupped his fists at the old man and asked, I wonder if Senior has seen him before? The old man was silent for a moment and shook his head. Never. With that, he paused for a moment and said, Young friend, your bloodline power is quite special. At this moment, his killing intent was gone. What was the thing that a person was most afraid of in their lifetime of cultivation? They were afraid of forming evil karma and bad karma. This world was too dangerous, so one had to be extremely careful in the outside world. Especially some people that one absolutely couldn't afford to offend. Once they did, it would be like stirring a hornet's nest. If one were to beat the young, then the old would come, and if one were to beat the old, then a group of old would come. But this young man before him was obviously someone with backing, and it was no ordinary backing. Once he killed him, there would be no end to future troubles. Yi Xian smiled. Senior's aura is as deep as the ocean. I'm afraid you've attained the Dao, right? The old man nodded. Attain the Dao. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Damn it. This old man has attained the Dao. No wonder I felt so dangerous. I've actually encountered a Dao realm expert. One must know that even if the Dao court and the Dao tomb were to be added together, there were only 4 cultivators at the Dao realm. Meanwhile, the old man spoke abruptly, with your strength, you shouldn't have stepped foot here. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Senior, what sort of place is the dark dimension? The old man hesitated for a moment and said, You don't know, yet you still dared to come here. Yi Xian blinked and said, Is this place very dangerous? The old man gazed at Yi Xian. Isn't it? Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and smiled embarrassedly. I don't think it's dangerous at all. The old man was speechless. Not dangerous. I almost killed you just now. You're not dangerous at all. Yi Xian spoke with a serious expression. My older brother said that you shouldn't be afraid of death. Young man, don't be afraid of death. You should temper yourself. The old man gazed at Yi Xian. Your older brother? Yi Xian nodded, and then he withdrew a sword from the top of the pagoda. My older brother gave this to me. It was the sword of the swordsman who wore a cloud-white robe. The old man's expression instantly turned solemn when he saw the sword of the founding ancestor of the Immortal Banished Island. The stronger one was, the more one would be able to sense how formidable those 3 swords were. The old man gazed at Yi Xian. This is your older brother? Yi Xian nodded, yes. The old man hesitated for a moment. Young friend, you. Needless to say, he was quite shocked at this moment. Who exactly is this young man? Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and then he said, Senior, have you been to the depths of the dark dimension? The old man shook his head. I haven't. There's muddy energy there and it's difficult for ordinary people to resist it. As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian. It's best that you don't go there as well. The muddy energy there isn't something you can resist right now. Yi Xian nodded. I'm not going. The old man cupped his fists. Young friend, I have something to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave. Obviously, he intended to ask Yi Xian to get off the pagoda. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Senior, do you know the origins of this sword energy? The old man shook his head. I don't know. I only know that a great battle took place here in the past. At this point he seemed to have thought of something and he gazed at Yi Xian. Young friend, this sword energy isn't able to harm you? Yi Xian grinned and then he took out a strand of sword energy. I don't know why this sword energy isn't able to harm me. The old man fell silent as he gazed at the sword energy in Yi Xian's hand that didn't resist it. The sword energy actually didn't resist. What the hell? The old man found it hard to comprehend. Meanwhile, Yi Xian spoke abruptly. Senior, may I ask why you're here? The old man replied, to settle some matters. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Senior, please forgive me for speaking out of turn, but you're neither from the Doubting Dao tomb, right? The old man nodded. No. However, I've heard of these two powers. Are you from the Doubting Dao tomb or the Doubting Dao tomb? Yi Xian smiled. I'm from the fifth dimension and I'm temporarily allied with the Doubting Dao tomb. The old man frowned. As far as I know, the Doubting Dao ancestor is the only one with decent strength, but your father and brother should be able to kill him without any pressure. Yi Xian bitterly smiled. There's no other way. They want to train me so that I can face everything by myself. Unless it's absolutely necessary, they won't make a move. The old man was silent. It's good to have a backer. You can do whatever you want. The old man withdrew his thoughts and glanced at Yi Xian. Young friend, I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, he left the starship. The old man cupped his fists and was about to leave. Meanwhile, he seemed to have thought of something and he hesitated for a moment before he said, Young friend, there's a ruin up ahead and it used to belong to an ancient power. I came here for that ruin. However, that ancient ruin is slightly special. Not only is there a huge amount of muddy chi outside, there's even powerful sword chi there. The sword chi is so strong that even I can't resist it. When he spoke up to this point, he paused for a moment before he continued. Young friend, are you interested in going with me to have a look? Yi Xian blinked but didn't speak. Why did this old man invite me? As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the old man smiled. I have no ill intentions towards you. To be honest, I've been investigating some matters in the outside world for the past few years, and I just happened to find that ruin. However, the sword chi there is extremely strong and even I can't resist it. I originally wanted to give up, but after I met you. Yi Xian understood when he heard this. The old man smiled. The sword chi isn't able to harm you, so it shouldn't be a problem if you intend to enter the ruin. Yi Xian fell silent. The old man continued. Don't worry, I won't take any of the wealth there. I'm only going there to investigate something. Yi Xian smiled. How could that do? I'll go with you and we'll split the wealth equally. The old man grinned. To tell you the truth, old man isn't an independent cultivator. So wealth is like floating clouds to me. Yi Xian thought for a moment before he smiled. Senior, let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Xian sat on the old man's starship and continued forward. It didn't take long for an enormous stone door to appear within Yi Xian's field of vision. There were two large words above the stone door. Sword Sect. The Sword Sect. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw these two words. The Sword Sect? To Yi Xian, this trip to the Sword Sect was like returning home. It was extremely intimate. Chapter 1388. The Sword Sect. There was a turbid aura drifting around the stone door. Apart from that, there was also some sword aura drifting around. The sword energy was very strong, extremely strong. The old man had a solemn expression in his eyes when he saw the sword energy. He'd been here once in the past, but he hadn't dared to go over. The muddy energy wasn't too bad because he could resist it, but the sword energy was strong to the point of killing him. If it was just pure sword energy, then he could resist it. But this place was quite strange and he didn't want to take the risk. Actually, he was extremely shocked when he just arrived here. Whose sword energy is still so strong even after a few tens of thousands of years. The old man sighed in his heart. As expected, there's always someone stronger in the world. Meanwhile, Xian walked towards the stone door. The old man hurriedly said, "Young brother, be careful." Xian nodded and walked towards the stone door. Even though he was confident in his ability, he still didn't dare be careless. When he arrived over 30 m away from the stone door, the sword energy that drifted around the stone door suddenly stopped moving. In the next moment, the sword energy transformed into rays of light that slashed towards Xian. The old man's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. But he was stunned in the next moment, because the countless rays of sword energy had stopped in front of Xian. All the rays of sword energy had stopped in front of Xian. The old man blinked. Are they really not going to target this fellow? Xian heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the rays of sword energy stop. The rays of sword energy were extremely formidable, and it would be extremely troublesome if they were really targeting him, because his sword was temporarily unable to absorb them. Xian didn't think too much about it and put them away. Meanwhile, the old man walked over to Xian's side, and then he glanced at Xian and exclaimed with admiration, "Young brother, you're truly an extraordinary person." Xian smiled. "Senior, do you have a way to deal with the muddy energy?" The old man nodded. "The muddy energy here is much inferior to the depths of the dark dimension. I can deal with it." Xian smiled and said, "Then let's go in." The two of them continued forward. Along the way, the old man waved his right hand and the turbid energy was blocked by a mysterious force. Xian glanced at the old man. This old man's strength was not ordinary. Behind the mountain gate were some ancient buildings. However, these buildings were extremely dilapidated. Some of them had even collapsed into ruins. It was obvious that a great battle had taken place here. At this time, the two of them arrived in front of a large hall. Half of the hall had already collapsed, leaving only the other half. It looked very desolate. Right at this moment, the old man suddenly said, "Young friend, watch out." With that said, he waved his right hand and a black shadow in front of Xian was directly pushed back. Xian gripped the sword tightly in his left hand. He looked at the black shadow. The shadow dissipated, revealing an illusory middle-aged man. A soul body. Although it was a soul body, the other party's aura was very powerful. Inside Xian's body, the soul-suppressing sword was ready to strike. The middle-aged man looked at the old man, reaching the Tao. The old man was expressionless, but his eyes flickered with killing intent. A mere dark abyss spirit dares to act rashly in front of this honored one. With that said, he pointed forward with his fingers, and a wave of cold and gloomy energy swept out. In the distance, the middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He suddenly punched out. Boom. With a loud explosion, the middle-aged man retreated rapidly. This time he retreated hundreds of feet away. But the old man did not retreat a single step. Xian glanced at the old man. This old man's strength was definitely above Luo Hu and the others. Reaching the Dao realm, he was really strong. The middle-aged man stared at the old man. "You know I come from the dark abyss. You are from the ancient god abyss." The old man was about to attack. Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Senior, please wait." The old man looked at Xian. Xian said, "Senior, you should also want to know what happened here, right?" After a moment of silence, the old man looked at the middle-aged man. "What happened here?" The middle-aged man did not speak but stared at Xian. "You are from the sword sect." Xian frowned. "Just because I am a swordsman, you think I am from the sword sect?" The middle-aged man did not speak. Xian looked at the old man. "Senior, what kind of place is this dark abyss? Is it the dark world?" The old man shook his head. "No, the dark abyss is a place more terrifying than the dark world." With that said, he looked at the middle-aged man. "Who killed you?" The middle-aged man said in a low voice, "A woman." "Woman." The old man frowned. "How many of you died?" The middle-aged man slowly clenched his fists, and his expression was ferocious. "More than 30. Xian suddenly asked, "More than 30 reaching the Dao realm?" The middle-aged man glanced at Xian. 12 reaching the Dao realm, 18 Dao defense realm peak. Hearing this, Yi Xian fell silent. He was shocked. 12 reaching the Dao realm. What did this mean? What kind of place was this dark abyss? Why was it so strong? At this moment the old man suddenly said, "More than 30 of you were all killed by a woman?" The middle-aged man ignored the old man and looked at Yi Xian. "Her sword aura did not hurt you. What's your relationship with her?" Yi Xian was silent. He was sure that the owner of the sword aura was not Qing'er, and among the women he knew only Qing'er and Sister Nian's sword aura were this strong. Apart from those two, he did not know any other female swordsman. At this moment the middle-aged man said, "What's your relationship with her?" Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man. "Take a guess." The old man was speechless. The middle-aged man was stunned, and then he spoke in a low voice, "She killed many of us." Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. "I didn't kill her. What does it have to do with me?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. "What's the difference between her killing him and you killing him?" Yi Xian flew into a rage. "Are you kidding me? Why is there no difference between her killing and me killing? Go and find her if you can." The middle-aged man was expressionless. "Killing you is the same." Yi Xian was so angry that his chest hurt. Damn it, he was obviously picking on the weak one. Thinking up to here, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. In the next moment, the soul-suppressing sword transformed into a ray of sword light and flew out. In the distance, the middle-aged man's face drastically changed. He did not attack but turned around and fled. His speed was extremely fast and he disappeared into the distance in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian and the old man were both stunned. Yi Xian's face was a little ugly. Damn it, that guy ran away. That person was at least at the Dao attainment realm. Although it was only a soul, if the other party chose to escape, there was nothing he could do. Damn it, that guy wouldn't call someone to beat me up, would he? Thinking up to here, Yi Xian's face became even uglier. The reason why the other party did not dare to escape before must be because of the sword qi. But now he had taken away all the sword qi. Thinking up to here, Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment the old man glanced at the soul-suppressing sword in front of Yi Xian. "Young friend, your sword has reached the Dao attainment realm. What a good sword." Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and smiled. "It's just so." Saying so, he put away the soul-suppressing sword. The old man said in a low voice, "Young friend, this dark yuan is not simple. You and them." Yi Xian sighed softly. "King, you saw it too. I have no enmity with them, but they insisted on pestering me. Tell me, is there any justice in this world? Is there any law in this world?" The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "Young friend, your identity isn't simple, so there's no need to pay too much attention to this dark yuan. However, you still have to be careful in the future." Yi Xian nodded. "Thank you for the reminder, senior." The old man nodded and then he glanced at the surroundings. In the end, his gaze shot towards the depths of the ruined hall. There was a corpse there. There was a sword by the corpse's side. The old man walked over to the corpse and sized it up carefully. A short while later he pressed his palm down lightly. "Condense." As soon as he finished speaking, the space in the surroundings suddenly trembled, and then an illusory soul appeared in front of the old man. The old man looked at the illusory soul. What happened here? The soul glanced at the surroundings in a daze. Suddenly he looked at Yi Xian and he was stunned when he saw Yi Xian. Yi Xian blinked. "Senior, you know me?" The soul looked at Yi Xian with slight disbelief. "You?" At this point he frowned. "How is this possible?" Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. "What do you mean?" The old man glanced at Yi Xian as well and he was also bewildered. The soul fell silent for a long time before he said, "You have the ancestral master's aura on you." Yi Xian took out the sword's spirit. "Is it this sword?" When he saw the sword, the soul took a deep look at Yi Xian. "You?" Yi Xian smiled. "I'm from the sword sect as well." The soul didn't speak. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly asked, "What exactly happened here?" The soul spoke softly. "Many years ago our sword sect suffered a calamity. Some mysterious experts appeared in our sword sect and slaughtered our sword sect." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" The soul's expression was complicated. "Because of a super mineral vein." "A super mineral vein?" Yi Xian hurriedly asked. "A super mineral vein?" The soul nodded. "Our sword sect obtained a super mineral vein in the dark world. This mineral vein stretches for thousands of miles and it has its own sentience. but we never thought that it would bring disaster to our sword sect. The old man said softly, a super mineral vein. No wonder the dark abyss would act. The soul spoke again. Back then, in order to avoid those experts, we used a formation to escape into the dark world. But we never thought that those people would be even more terrifying than we imagined. They were not afraid of the turbid gas at all and directly entered the dark world to kill us. Xian said gravely, but those experts from the dark abyss are also dead. Who killed them? The soul replied gravely, Ancestral Master. Xian asked, the azure-robed man? The soul glanced at Xian and shook his head. It's not Ancestral Master. Xian was a little curious. It's not the azure-robed man? The soul nodded. It's Ancestral Master Ting Yun. Ting Yun. Xian was stunned. He had heard senior sister Lu say this before, but he didn't take it to heart. Was Ting Yun that strong? At this moment the old man suddenly said, Little friend, what's your relationship with this senior Ting Yun? Xian blinked and said, Senior sister. She's my senior sister. The old man fell silent. Damn, your father is so freakish, your big brother is also freakish, your senior sister is also freakish. Who is this guy? Is his whole family so terrifying? P.S. Tickets. Chapter 1389. Xian was a little shocked at this moment because he really didn't expect Ting Yun's strength to be so terrifying. Over a dozen completed Dao realm experts had been killed. This was simply not treating completed Dao realm experts as humans. At this time the middle-aged man's soul gradually became illusory. Xian looked at the old man. The old man shook his head. His soul was originally scattered. I forcefully gathered it. Now his soul is extremely weak and is about to scatter from the world. Xian thought for a moment, and then he opened his palm and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in front of the middle-aged man. In the next moment, the soul-suppressing sword directly released a powerful soul force that enveloped the middle-aged man, and the middle-aged man's soul that was about to disperse suddenly condensed once more. A trace of surprise flashed through the old man's eyes when he saw this. He glanced at the soul-suppressing sword but did not say anything. In front of Xian, the middle-aged man shook his head and smiled. It's meaningless. To a certain extent, his soul had already been destroyed. Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, I'll send you into reincarnation. Then, the mark of the god of reincarnation suddenly appeared between his brows. Seeing this scene, the old man was a little curious. Little friend, is this the reincarnation Great Dao? Xian nodded. Senior, you also know about the reincarnation Great Dao? The old man smiled and said, Who doesn't know about the 3,000 Great Daos? This Samsara Grand Dao is ranked in the top 10 amongst the 3,000 Grand Daos. If you make good use of it, it'll be of great use in the future. Xian blinked. What great use? The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, You don't know? Xian shook his head. I don't know. I obtained this seal of the God's will of the reincarnation Dao by chance. He obtained it by chance. The old man was speechless. Meanwhile, Xian suddenly smiled and said, Senior, let's talk later. With that he looked at the middle-aged man. Sir, enter the cycle of reincarnation. The middle-aged man took a deep look at Xian. Take care. With that he entered the reincarnation cave. Soon the middle-aged man's soul completely disappeared. Xian kept the samsara seal and looked at the old man. Senior, what's the use of this samsara god seal? In the past he'd used it to reach the Dao corroboration realm. Now that he'd reached the Dao corroboration realm, he hadn't used the samsara god seal in a very long time. The old man said, When you reach the Dao formation realm in the future, you can use the divine seal of samsara. Xian blinked. This god seal can help people achieve the Dao? The old man nodded. Sure. However, if you borrow the god seal to reach the Dao, it will be very difficult. Furthermore, if you use this god seal to achieve Dao, you will be the reincarnation Great Dao. Do you understand what I mean? Upon hearing this, Xian understood. If he used the reincarnation god seal to achieve the Dao, then he, Xian, would become the god seal. He, Xian, would be the reincarnation Great Dao, one of the 3,000 Great Daos. Xian gazed at the old man. Is there a problem with that? The old man spoke in a low voice. There's a huge problem. Because it'll be difficult for you to break through again. The grand Dao of samsara isn't a Dao that you've come up with on your own, it's the Dao of someone else. The grand Dao of samsara itself has reached its end. If you become it, then it means that attaining the Tao will be your end, and it'll be extremely difficult for you to continue breaking through. However, attaining the Tao is the lifelong pursuit of many, and it all depends on one's own choice. Yu Xian nodded and spoke softly, I understand. The old man smiled. Young brother, I came here to investigate the dark abyss. Now that I've finished my investigation, I have to return to report on my mission. Yu Xian gazed at the old man. Senior, what's your name? The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, Su Ku. Yu Xian cupped his fists. Senior Su Ku, will meet again. Su Ku cupped his fists as well. Young brother, will meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to leave. However, he seemed to have thought of something and said, Young brother, that expert from the dark abyss has fled. You have to be careful of the dark abyss because it isn't a simple place. Yu Xian nodded. Thank you for the warning, senior. Su Ku continued. Besides that, the muddy energy in the depths of the dark world is extremely strong. Young brother, you must not continue forward because you'll enter the depths of the dark world if you continue forward. The muddy energy there isn't something you can resist right now. Yu Xian turned around and glanced at the distance, but there was only pitch-black darkness at the end of his vision. The depths of the dark world? Yu Xian fell into deep contemplation. Su Ku didn't speak another word and he just turned around and left. After Su Ku left, Yu Xian started to plunder the top-grade ores like a madman. About 2 hours later, Yu Xian had obtained 6 top-grade mineral veins and more than 1,300,000 divine crystals of fortune. Over 1,300,000 divine fortune crystals. What sort of concept was that? It could be said that even the entire Dao Ting and the Dao Tomb combined couldn't compare to his wealth. Of course, he also plundered the experts' corpses. He buried the Sword Sex experts' corpses properly, while the Dark Abyss experts' corpses were also plundered. His harvest wasn't small at all. There were several tens of thousands of divine fortune crystals and all kinds of treasures. A huge windfall. After plundering, Yu Xian didn't choose to leave. Instead, he looked towards the depths of the dark world. There must be more top-grade ores in the depths of the dark world, because he could already feel the dense spiritual energy there. At this time, Yi Jiming's voice suddenly sounded, Don't be greedy. Yu Xian nodded and turned to leave. He was satisfied with his harvest today. Right at this time he stopped again. Yi Jiming asked, What is it? Yu Xian said solemnly, Ximing, I almost forgot something. Yi Jiming asked, What is it? Yu Xian said softly, I've already become a Dao physique. Do you think my Dao physique can resist the turbid qi? Yi Jiming fell silent. Yu Xian suddenly smiled. The Dao scripture is known as the #1 body tempering technique, and the Dao physique is known as the #1 constitution. I'm curious, can the Dao physique resist the turbid qi? Yi Jiming said, Why don't you give it a try? She was also curious. This is a Dao scripture martial art. Yu Xian nodded and looked around. There were still some turbid qi drifting around the sword sect. His body trembled and he appeared in front of a strand of turbid qi, grabbing it with his right hand. Yu Xian stared at the strand of turbid qi. A moment later he smiled. Because nothing happened to his body at all. The turbid qi had no effect on his Dao physique. Yu Xian looked at the strand of turbid qi in his hand. As if he thought of something, he suddenly loosened his grip and allowed the turbid qi to enter his body. Nothing happened to him after the turbid qi entered his body. Yu Xian slowly closed his eyes and said excitedly, Ximing, I have a great plan. Yi Jiming asked, What plan? The corner of Yi Xian's lips curled up slightly. The next moment he disappeared on the spot. Not long later Yi Xian entered the depths of the dark realm. When he arrived at the depths of the dark realm, Yi Xian discovered that his surroundings were pitch black and filled with turbid qi. The turbid qi here was extremely dense. Not to mention Dao controlling experts, even Dao attainment experts wouldn't dare to step into this place recklessly. This time Yi Xian did not look for any top-grade mineral veins. Instead he frantically absorbed the turbid qi. He used his body as a vessel and absorbed all the turbid qi into his body. When it reached a certain level, Yi Xian opened his palm and a sword quietly formed in his hand. It was a sword condensed from turbid qi. Apart from that, tens of thousands of qi swords suddenly appeared around him. All of them were qi swords formed from turbid qi. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian couldn't help but laugh. His Dao body was immune to the turbid qi, but not everyone had a Dao body. These 10,000 qi swords formed from turbid qi were even more terrifying than the soul-suppressing sword. Because these qi swords would kill upon contact. Ordinary experts wouldn't be able to withstand the turbid qi at all. Once touched, they would immediately enter heavenly decay. Xian didn't stop and continued to absorb the turbid qi. After absorbing it, he immediately condensed the turbid qi into swords. Inside the prison pagoda, Yi Ximing was silent as she watched Xian frantically condense swords. The cause of misfortune? She was starting to suspect that this was the cause of misfortune. She was actually starting to sympathize with doubting. If this went on, doubting would be toyed to death by Xian. About 4 hours later, Xian absorbed all the turbid qi within hundreds of thousands of miles and condensed it into swords. And now he had a total of 120,000 swords. All of them were condensed from turbid qi. And with his current strength, forget about 120,000 swords, he could even control 500,000 swords. Of course, the reason why he didn't do this before was because the sword qi was more refined than quantity. But it was different now. These swords were special. It could be said that these swords formed from turbid qi didn't require much of his strength at all. These swords formed from turbid qi themselves carried a strange power. He just needed to control these swords. It was that simple. Xian put away all of the swords and walked towards the depths of the dark world. However, he didn't walk for long when he suddenly stopped. He suddenly turned around. Not far in front of him, a powerful aura swept over. Xian's brows furrowed slightly. Soon, a white figure appeared in front of him. White robe. Seeing white robe, Xian was expressionless. This doubting really didn't give up. White robe glanced at the surroundings and frowned slightly. Why isn't there any turbid qi here? Xian looked at white robe and didn't speak. White robe looked at Xian. You did it. Xian slowly clenched his right hand. At this moment, white robe said again, you can ignore the turbid qi. Xian didn't speak. White robe looked deeply at Xian. He didn't choose to attack but turned around and left. Xian didn't choose to attack either because he wasn't confident that he could kill white robe. And he didn't want to expose this turbid qi now. This would be a killer move that he would leave for doubting. On the spot, Xian was silent for a moment before he continued walking towards the depths of the dark world. He wanted to go to the deepest part to take a look. The depths of the dark world, which was also the depths of the celestial abyss. What exactly was there? About an hour later, Xian's brows gradually furrowed because he felt an invisible pressure. This pressure was like several mountains pressing down on him, making it difficult for him to breathe. An hour later, Xian stopped in his tracks. He didn't dare to continue forward. Because he felt that he couldn't breathe. That pressure was too strong. What exactly was in the depths of the dark world? Xian was silent for a moment before he turned around and left. At this moment, a pitch-black hand suddenly landed on his shoulder. Without a sound. Chapter 1390. Xian did not dare to move. And that hand just rested on his shoulder. Xian did not sense anyone behind him, and that was the most terrifying thing. There was clearly someone, and the other party had a hand on his shoulder, but he could not sense the other party. Who was it? Xian turned around, but there was nothing in front of him. There was nothing. Xian fell silent. In the next moment, Xian turned around and ran. Hee hee. At this moment, a strange laughter suddenly sounded from all around him. Xian stopped and glanced around, but he did not find anything. After a moment of silence, Xian continued forward. At this moment, the space in front of him suddenly split open, and a face suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the face of a little girl. The little girl's face was as pale as a sheet, and her hair was disheveled, covering half of her face. At this moment, the little girl was staring at him with a sinister smile. It had to be said that Xian was shocked. Xian looked at the little girl in front of him and grinned. Seeing Xian smile, the little girl was slightly taken aback. In the next moment, she grabbed Xian's throat and a powerful force locked onto Xian. The moment the little girl made a move, Xian's soul-subduing sword suddenly unsheathed. As a cutting sound rang out, the human face disappeared, and Xian retreated thousands of feet away. As soon as Xian stopped, a little girl in white appeared in front of him. The little girl in white looked at Xian and grinned. This smile was somewhat sinister. Immediately after, she was about to make a move, but at this moment, Xian suddenly took out a candied hawthorn. The little girl looked at the candied hawthorn in Xian's hand and blinked. Xian flicked his finger and the candied hawthorn landed in front of the little girl in white. The white-clothed little girl hesitated for a moment, and then she took the candied fruit and licked it lightly. In next to no time her eyes lit up with disbelief. Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, he was just trying it out because he realized that some of the younger ones seemed to like Tonghulu. Obviously, the little girl in front of him also liked Tonghulu. The little girl in white was indeed attracted by the candied hawthorn. She licked with relish. Xian sized up the little girl in white. This little girl's strength was not an ordinary kind of ferocious. Because just now this little girl had forcefully taken a blow from his sword and was completely fine. Soon the little girl finished eating the candied haws. Xian quickly took out another stick of candied hawthorn and handed it to the little girl. The little girl in white looked at Xian. She took the candied hawthorn but did not say anything. Xian smiled and asked, "What's your name?" The white-clothed little girl didn't say anything. Xian took out a stick of candied hawthorn and gave it to the white-clothed girl. The white-clothed girl took it and said, "Nagalu." Nagalu? Xian frowned slightly. That name is a little strange. The white-clothed little girl looked at Xian and didn't say anything. Xian smiled and said, "Nagalu, what are you doing here?" Nagalu didn't answer and just licked the candied hawthorn. Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "Do you want to go out and play?" Nagalu looked at Xian and said, "I can't go out." Xian was slightly puzzled. "Why? I can even go out." Nagalu pointed to the right. Xian looked over but there was nothing there. Meanwhile, Nagalu suddenly walked over. The space in front of Nagalu suddenly split open a few hundred meters away, and then a huge golden word floated out. "Stop." The golden word, "stop," blocked Nagalu's path and there was fear in Nagalu's eyes. Xian looked at the word and said in a low voice, "Ximing, do you know what this is?" Ximing was silent for a moment then said, "I've never seen it before." Xian walked over to Nagalu's side and looked at the golden word. It was obvious that someone had trapped Nagalu here. Who could it be? A single word had trapped the powerful Nagalu here. Xian was silent for a moment, then he looked at Nagalu and said, "Why don't you enter my Xiaotao?" Nagalu pointed at Xian's abdomen. "Inside." Xian nodded. Nagalu fell silent. Xian smiled and said, "Give it a try? What if I can get out?" Nagalu thought about it then nodded and entered the prison pagoda. Inside the pagoda, Nagalu looked around curiously. Outside, Xian looked at the giant golden word. He walked forward slowly. At this moment, the giant golden word suddenly erupted with a beam of golden light. Xian's expression changed drastically, and he slashed with his sword. A tearing sound resounded. Bang! An expanse of sword light suddenly erupted in the dark realm. In the next moment, Xian was instantly blasted back 30 kilometers away. After he stopped, Xian's expression was extremely solemn. He looked at the golden word. "What the hell is this?" Suddenly, the golden word trembled violently as if it was about to attack again. Xian's expression changed drastically, and he suddenly leaped up and stabbed with his sword. The sword of the way. As he stabbed with his sword, the remaining turbid qi in the surroundings was instantly reduced to nothingness. The sword is the way is the sword. This was the first time Xian had used the sword of the way. At this moment, the golden word suddenly transformed into a ray of golden light and vanished. A moment of silence. Bang! An expanse of golden light and sword light suddenly erupted in this expansive space, and then a figure retreated repeatedly amidst the sword light and golden light. It was Xian. This time Xian had retreated by an entire 30 kilometers. However, the golden word had retreated by 3 kilometers as well. Xian had just stopped moving when the space behind him exploded apart, and he even spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence. Xian wiped off the blood on the corners of his mouth, and then he gazed at the golden word. What the hell is this? It's actually so terrifying. If his physical body wasn't sufficiently strong, then he would have probably been obliterated by that attack. Meanwhile, Nagalu appeared by Xian's side. She gazed at Xian in silence. Xian laughed bitterly. "I can't defeat him." Nagalu turned around and left. Xian hesitated for a moment and then he followed her. Along the way, Nagalu didn't speak. Xian smiled. "Nagalu, how long have you been here?" Nagalu raised a finger. Xian blinked. 10,000 years? Nagalu looked at Xian. 100,000 years. 100,000 years. Xian was stunned. She had been here for 100,000 years. What the hell? This little girl had lived for 100,000 years? At this time Nagalu stopped and Xian looked up. Not far away there was a floating mountain. This mountain was 100,000 zhang tall, and there were some scattered floating rocks around it. Xian followed Nagalu to the top of the mountain. When they arrived, Xian saw an old man. The old man sat cross-legged on a boulder, his long hair draped over his shoulders, and his aura was as deep as the sea. Xian's expression turned solemn. There was a powerhouse here. At this time Nagalu walked to the old man's side, and she handed the candied hawthorn in her hand to the old man. The old man opened his eyes, glanced at the candied hawthorn in Nagalu's hand and smiled. "You eat." Nagalu shook her head. The old man smiled, took the candied hawthorn and then looked at Xian in the distance, smiling. "Daoist body. How many years has it been since I last saw it?" Daoist body. Hearing this, Xian's expression suddenly became extremely solemn. Daoist body was a part of the Daoist scripture martial arts, and in the words of Knowing Destiny, there were only two people who knew about the Daoist scripture martial arts. One was the owner of the Daoist scripture and the other was her. This old man in front of him actually knew about Daoist body. Could it be the owner of the Daoist scripture? But it didn't seem like it. Xian's mind was full of questions. At this time the old man smiled. "Young man, do you have many questions?" Xian nodded. "How does Senior know about Daoist body?" The old man smiled. "Because someone has successfully cultivated it." Xian asked. "Who?" The old man said softly. "It was a very, very long time ago." Xian glanced at the old man. "Who are you, Senior?" The old man looked at Xian. "Young man, do you believe in fate?" Xian was silent. "Damn, this old man is trying to fool me." The old man smiled. "I believe in fate, and to be able to meet you today, it is enough to prove that we are fated." Xian smiled. "With Senior's strength, you should be able to see the cause of my misfortune, right?" The old man was silent. Xian said, "Senior, if there is anything you want to say, you can say it directly." The old man said softly, "Young man, you are a straightforward person, so I will say it directly. To be honest, I want you to do me a favor." Xian did not say anything. He did not dare to casually agree to someone else's request. This old man was unfathomable and the other party was actually trapped here. One could imagine how strong the person who trapped them was. The old man looked at Xian. "Young man, can you help me bring my granddaughter out?" "Jiaolu." Xian looked at Jiaolu. Jiaolu licked his tongue hulu and did not say anything. The old man said again, "Young man, over the years, there have been some people who have come here, but I did not ask them for help. I did not intend to ask you for help because the karma between my granddaughter and me is not something an ordinary person can bear." Xian frowned. "You think I can bear it?" The old man looked at Xian. "You have the cause of misfortune but you still lived until now. Young man, do you know how terrifying that is?" Xian was silent. The old man said again, "Young man, I do not know your background but I know that it is not simple." Xian looked at Jiaolu and said with a smile, "Senior, the person who can trap you must have strength that I cannot resist, right?" The old man nodded. "It is not someone you can resist. However, this is a grudge between me and him. My granddaughter is innocent, so I want to ask you for a favor and bring her out." Xian did not say anything. The old man looked at Xian. "I do not have any benefits for you. On the contrary, if you save my granddaughter, it is very likely that you will be tainted with some bad karma, and this karma will bring you great trouble in the future." Xian said with a smile. "Then Senior, do you think I will save her?" The old man said with a smile, "You will." Xian did not understand. "Why?" The old man smiled slightly. "Because you are a good person." Xian was struck dumb. Then he shook his head. "Sir, I have a lot of friends behind me. Anything I say or do can bring disaster to them. So, do you understand what I mean?" The old man was silent. Xian said, "If I am alone I will save her, but I have a universe behind me, so I am sorry." After saying that he turned around and left. Be a good person? He really did not mind doing good things, but the premise was that he had the strength. Taking care of things that were not within one's ability would not only bring disaster to oneself, but also to the entire five-dimensional universe. Doing good things, he had to act within his ability. If he did not have the ability, then he really should not meddle in other people's business. Moreover, he did not know the ins and outs of the matter. Who knew whether this old man deserved it or not? The Respected Blade. Chapter 1391. The old man sighed softly when he saw Yi Xian leave decisively. Yi Xian still didn't stop. At this moment the old man suddenly appeared before Yi Xian. Yi Xian held the sword tightly in his right hand and didn't speak, but he was secretly on guard. The old man smiled. "Young friend, perhaps we can talk in a different way." Yi Xian looked at the old man. "Feel free to bluff me, senior." The old man laughed. "Young friend, you're interesting." Yi Xian didn't speak. The old man sized up Yi Xian and smiled. "Young friend, I saw that your Dao form has just reached the Dao validation realm, right?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The old man smiled. "Do you want to reach the Dao defense realm?" "The Dao defense realm." Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, "Are you serious?" The old man nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian fell silent. The old man continued, "Young friend, there will be trouble if you save my granddaughter, but this trouble is in the future. Since it's in the future, then there are many uncertain factors. At that time it might seem troublesome now, but it might be a trivial matter to you. To put it simply, whether the trouble in the future is big or small or no trouble at all, it all depends on your strength in the future." Yi Xian looked at the old man in confusion. "Who are you people?" The old man smiled. "The dragon horde, the most ancient dragon horde." Dragon. Yi Xian couldn't help but glance at Jialo in the distance. No wonder this little girl's defense is so abnormal. So it's a dragon. The old man continued, "Young friend, if you're willing to help, this old man can not only help you reach the Dao defense realm, but he can also pass on everything to you from the dragon horde. Of course, this old man won't bluff you. Forming good karma with the dragon horde is equivalent to forming bad karma with others. However, little friend should also understand that since ancient times, fortune and misfortune come hand in hand. There are gains and losses. It all depends on little friend's choice." Yi Xian looked at the old man. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't give me any benefits?" The old man smiled and said, "It's just a test." Yi Xian asked, "What's there to test? Do you think I'm a good person?" The old man smiled and said, "Little friend, you are neither good nor evil. You are not a pure good person, nor are you a pure evil person." After a moment of silence, Yi Xian asked, "What level has senior reached?" The old man thought for a moment and said, "Do you really want to know?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man smiled and said, 2 or 3 realms higher than you, little friend. Above achieving the Dao." Yi Xian asked softly, "Senior, what is above achieving Dao?" The old man smiled and said, "You will know in the future." Yi Xian was speechless. "Can't I know in advance?" The old man shook his head. "It's meaningless. Don't ask about meaningless things." Yi Xian was about to speak when the old man said, "Little friend, let me discuss my specific conditions with you. If you are willing to help, then not only will I help your Dao body attain the Dao defense realm, I will even give you the wealth of the Jialong tribe. Moreover, the Jialong tribe has 12 dragon souls. Even though they are only souls, they are all at the peak of the Dao defense realm. Moreover, they are not ordinary peak Dao defense realm experts. Ordinary experts at the Dao defense realm are utterly unable to resist them. 12 dragon souls. All at the peak of the Dao defense realm." Yi Xian was slightly tempted. At this time the old man added, "As for wealth, all the top-grade mines in the heavenly world abyss belong to my dragon tribe. As long as little friend agrees, I will gift all the top-grade mines to little friend, as well as some of my dragon tribe's treasures. Everything will belong to little friend." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Senior, this," the old man continued, "there are over 30 top-grade spirit veins in the depths of the dark world, and every single one of them contains at least 1,000,000 divine fortune crystals." Yi Xian suddenly said seriously, "I'll do it." The old man looked at Yi Xian. "Won't you think about it?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. "There's no need to think about it." The old man smiled. "You know how strong I am. Just think about it. How terrifying is the person who can trap me? Are you really not going to think about it?" Yi Xian chuckled. "I really want to think about the future. However, my top priority now is to think about the present." Would the doubting let him go? Of course not. As for the Dao tomb, he would not place his hopes on it at all. As long as there were enough benefits, the Dao tomb would abandon him at any time. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian said solemnly, "Senior, there's a large golden word outside." The old man smiled. I'll take care of that. Yi Xian nodded. Then there's no problem. The old man said, come with me. After saying that he walked into the distance. Yi Xian and Jialo followed. Soon the old man brought Yi Xian and Jialo to a well. Yi Xian glanced at the well. It was not water in the well but blood. It was full of blood. The blood was boiling like magma. The old man said softly, when my dragon horde was massacred, I preserved the blood of my dragon horde. After saying that he looked at Yi Xian, go down. Yi Xian said solemnly, absorb? The old man smiled, no, go down and use the dragon blood to temper your body. My dragon horde's blood is extremely young and tyrannical. It has a miraculous effect on the tempering of the body. This much dragon blood is enough to improve your Daoist physique to the next level. Not only that, but it will also give you the power of the dragon blood. Yi Xian glanced at the dragon blood and jumped into the well without hesitation. Boom. In an instant Yi Xian's eyes widened. Burn. At this moment Yi Xian felt his body burning. The power of the dragon blood. This well contained almost all the dragon blood of the Jia dragon horde. This dragon blood was so powerful that ordinary Dao defense realm cultivators would immediately be reduced to ashes if they entered. Only Yi Xian's Daoist physique could withstand the power of so much dragon blood. If it was an ordinary person, they would probably be burned to ashes the moment they came into contact with the dragon blood. At this moment, the blood in Yi Xian's body suddenly surged. Boom. In an instant Yi Xian began to absorb the dragon blood around him. He was devouring. The old man watched quietly from the side. He did not stop him and his expression was calm as if he had already expected this. Beside the old man, Jialo was still quietly licking his candied fruit, not saying a word. Meanwhile the old man suddenly grabbed Jialo's hand and spoke softly, little girl, follow him later, all right? Jialo shook her head. The old man looked at Jialo and smiled, little girl, you're the last hope of the dragon horde. Grandpa didn't want you to carry this burden, but you have no choice. Look at the dragon horde. 136 dragons were skinned and their tendons skinned. We living dragons can't forget this blood feud. Grandpa isn't capable enough to avenge our clansmen. Only you can avenge them. Jialo remained silent. The old man looked at the well and spoke softly, you must follow him. Only by following him will you have a chance to avenge the dragon horde. Besides that, little girl, it's time for you to go out and see the outside world. Jialo still remained silent. The old man looked at Yi Xian in the well. This person has the disaster seed and has cultivated a Dao body. He's not simple, especially his bloodline power. His bloodline power is even stronger than our Jia dragon tribes. I have to say that it's terrifying for a human's bloodline to reach such a level. However, because of the disaster seed, his troubles may be endless. Little girl, you must be careful when you follow him. Just because he's tough doesn't mean the lives of those around him are tough. Jialo still remained silent. The old man looked at Jialo with a complicated expression. Little girl, if you can take revenge in the future, do so. If you can't, then don't. Remember, staying alive is the most important thing. You must live well. Jialo looked at the old man. Let's go together. The old man smiled and was about to speak when the well in the distance suddenly exploded and Yi Xian floated out. At that moment Yi Xian's body exuded an extremely powerful aura. His body was red as if it was condensed from fresh blood. Dragon blood. He had absorbed all the dragon blood. Now his Dao body had reached the Dao Imperial realm. Yi Xian opened his eyes and clenched his fists. In an instant the space around him split apart. A trace of excitement flashed in Yi Xian's eyes. After he had devoured the dragon blood, his Dao body had not only reached the Dao Imperial realm, but he had also obtained the bloodline power of the dragon tribe. The characteristic of the bloodline power of the dragon tribe was power. Unparalleled power. He could now easily kill a Dao Imperial realm expert with the power of his physical body. With the strength of his current physical body, he would not be afraid even if he faced experts at the level of Zhenwu and White Robe. He could go head-on against experts at the level of White Robe and Zhenwu. The improvement this time was far too great. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked at the old man in the distance. He cupped his fists and said, "Thank you." The old man smiled and said, "Congratulations, young friend." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. "Senior, was this Heaven Abyss once the territory of the dragon tribe?" The old man nodded. "This place used to be the territory of the dragon tribe. Later on, a great battle occurred here, so it became an abyss. The mineral veins in this abyss all belong to the dragon tribe. Xian spoke softly. I see. Meanwhile, the old man withdrew a spatial ring. This spatial ring contains all the treasures and mineral veins of the dragon tribe. Can be said that all the wealth of the dragon tribe is in here. Now I'll give it to you. However, Xian did not take it. The old man smiled. Young friend, are you going back on your word? Xian spoke in a low voice. Senior, aren't you afraid of entrusting it to the wrong person? The old man roared with laughter. Young friend, I believe in your character. Xian shook his head and smiled. To be honest, even I don't really believe in my character. The old man smiled. Young friend, I'll be honest with you as well. Besides you, I have no one else to choose from. Xian fell silent. The old man looked at Jialu, who was beside him. Young friend, this granddaughter of mine has been here for too long and is slightly introverted. However, her nature's not bad. After she leaves with you, I hope you treat her well. Xian glanced at Jialu. Don't worry, senior. Xian will take good care of Miss Jialu after I've benefited from you. The old man spoke softly. This old man can rest assured. As he spoke, he spread open his hands. In an instant, his body started to crack inch by inch. At the same time, an extremely overbearing aura suddenly appeared on the mountain peak. In next to no time, an enormous dragon that was over 100 kilometers long appeared on the mountain peak. In front of this enormous dragon, the mountain beneath Xian's feet was like a speck of dust. Xian was shocked. He had never seen such an enormous dragon before. Compared to this dragon, the so-called true dragons in the past were like earthworms. At this moment, the enormous dragon suddenly raised its head and roared angrily. In an instant, the entire celestial abyss shook violently. At this moment, whether it was the doubting world or the Dao tomb, everyone was shocked. In the sky above the mountain peak, the enormous dragon raised its head and looked into the distance, laughing loudly. Girl, remember well. Even if there is only one dragon left in my dragon clan, we must still live with our backs straight. We can die, we can be exterminated, but our dragon clan's courage and pride cannot be lost. Even if we die, we must die standing. Is that so? At this moment, an ancient voice suddenly sounded from afar. This voice seemed to come from ancient times, and it was illusory. At almost the same time, somewhere in the distant starry sky, a woman in a plain dress suddenly stopped in her tracks. The woman in the plain dress just stood there silently, not saying a word. As the ancient voice sounded from the depths of the celestial abyss, a huge golden word suddenly appeared before the enormous dragon, and a faint shadow could be seen within the golden word. The golden word transformed into a golden ray of light that shot explosively towards the enormous dragon. In the sky, the enormous dragon suddenly raised its head and roared, and then it directly collided with the golden ray of light. Boom! This collision caused the entire celestial abyss to shake violently like a huge earthquake. In the sky, the enormous dragon had just come into contact with the golden word, and then the enormous dragon actually started to crumble inch by inch. When he saw this, Xian's expression instantly changed. Such a powerful dragon actually couldn't defeat this word? Xian was extremely shocked. At this moment, the old man's pained voice suddenly resounded in the sky. Take her and leave. Xian didn't waste any time, and he directly pulled Jialo, who was beside him, and ran madly towards the distance. At this moment, the enormous dragon had already turned into ashes. A super expert above the Dao attainment realm had been instantly killed just like that. His soul had been completely destroyed. Xian was extremely shocked. Damn, this was too frightening. Hurry up and run. Xian pulled Jialo and quickened their pace. At this moment, Xian and Jialo suddenly stopped, because the huge golden word had appeared in front of them. Within the huge golden word, a faint shadow could be seen. Xian looked at this shadow with an extremely solemn expression. Beside Xian, Jialo stared at the shadow. 2 streams of clear liquid had appeared on her cheeks, and her eyes were filled with undisguised killing intent. The huge golden word suddenly trembled slightly as if it was about to attack. At this moment, somewhere in the distant starry sky, the woman in the plain dress suddenly turned her head and glanced at it. Back him. You can try. P.S. Tickets. Chapter 1392. As soon as she said this, the golden word in front of Xian and Jialo stopped moving. Xian was stunned. The woman in the plain dress continued to walk into the distance. At this moment, a voice resounded from the starry sky behind her. "Who are you?" In the distance, the woman in the plain dress didn't even turn around. "Someone you can't afford to offend. Someone you can't afford to offend." The starry sky suddenly became quiet. Heaven, abyss, dark world. The golden word in front of Xian suddenly became illusory, and then it gradually disappeared completely. Xian and Jialo were stunned. "Gone?" Xian lifted his head to take a look. He said softly, "Is that you, Qinger?" There was no response. Xian was silent for a moment and then he left with Jialo. Jialo didn't speak along the way. Xian glanced at Jialo and said, "Miss Jialo, why don't you come to my tower first?" Jialo nodded and disappeared on the spot. Xian looked around. He had to admit that he had gained a lot this time. Very much. The treasures he had obtained from the Naga Dragon clan were enough to change the fate of the entire fifth dimension. Truly changed the fate of the fifth dimension. There were a total of 36 top-grade mineral veins in the spatial ring the old man had given him. In addition to the ones he had obtained before, he now had a total of 40 top-grade mineral veins. And he had tens of millions of divine fortune crystals. Tens of millions. What did that mean? It could be said that the total wealth of the Dao Ting and the Dao Tomb couldn't compare to Xian. With these divine fortune crystals he could cultivate a large number of Dao-proving realm experts, and even Dao-controlling realm experts. Of course, what he needed the most now was time. The complete rise of the fifth dimension was only a matter of time. Apart from that, he had also gained a lot this time. He now had over 100,000 energy swords, and all of them were condensed from turbid qi. Even an ordinary Dao defense realm expert would find it difficult to resist the turbid qi. This was the gift he had prepared for the Dao Ting. Of course, the biggest gain was the improvement of his Taoist body. With his current body he could fight against a top expert like true martial god. It could be said that if it was a one-on-one battle, the only ones who could pose a fatal threat to him were experts of the Dao realm. In addition, he had also obtained the treasures of the Naga dragons. The treasures of the dragon clan were truly terrifying. In short, the harvest this time was bountiful. Of course, he didn't get too excited. Now he had to face a problem, and that was how to explain everything that had happened in the dark world. However, this was not a problem for him. After a while, Xian left the black vortex. As soon as he appeared outside the vortex, Rahu and the others appeared in front of him. Luo Ho glanced at Xian. "Let's talk somewhere else." After saying that, everyone disappeared. Heavenly King Palace. Apart from Luo Ho, Qi Yaoyao, Bitter King and Barbarian King were also in the hall. At this moment, everyone was looking at Xian. Xian smiled. "Everyone must be very curious about what happened in the vortex." Luo Ho nodded. "Tell us." Xian told them about the sword sect, but he didn't say anything about Jialo and the old man. In any case, it was half the truth and half a lie. After a while, Luo Ho suddenly asked, "That's it?" Xian nodded. "That's it." Luo Ho looked at Xian. "You didn't know that something big happened in the dark world?" Xian said, "I know, but it came from the depths of the dark world. I didn't go there, so I don't know what happened there either." At this moment, Bitter King suddenly said, "You really don't know, or you don't want to say?" Xian looked at Bitter King and smiled. "Bitter King, you really think highly of me. How could I go to the depths of the dark world?" Bitter King gazed at Xian and didn't speak. Meanwhile, Luo Ho suddenly said, "Did you get anything?" Xian nodded. "I brought 6 top-grade ores from the Sword Sect ruins." As soon as he finished speaking, he withdrew a spatial ring and passed it to Luo Ho. "I'll take 3. Luo Ho glanced at Xian and put the spatial ring away. Meanwhile, Zhan Man spoke abruptly, "What right do you have to take 3? Xian replied, "I risked my life for them." Zhan Man gazed at Xian. "Without us to stop the doubting, you wouldn't have been able to enter." Xian ignored Zhan Man and looked at Luo Ho instead. Luo Ho remained silent. Xian smiled. "It's fine. They're all yours. I don't want any of them." As soon as he finished speaking, he placed a spatial ring in front of Luo Ho. Inside the spatial ring were 3 top-grade ores. After putting down the spatial ring, Xian turned around and left. Zhan Man King frowned. "Wait." Xian turned around to look at Zhan Man King. Zhan Man King stared at Xian. "I suspect there are more than 6. Xian laughed. "Zhan Man King, are you an idiot? Zhang Man King narrowed his eyes and punched out. In the distance Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded in the hall. Yi Xian retreated a dozen steps while Zhang Man King returned to his original position. Luo Ho and Bitter King looked at Yi Xian with a trace of shock in their eyes. Yi Xian's strength has become so strong? Qin Yaoyao sipped her tea slowly and didn't speak at all. Zhang Man King was about to attack again when Yi Xian suddenly said, Zhang Man King, you can attack if you want, but it's pointless to stop now. How about this? I challenge you to a life and death duel and I won't stop until one of us dies. Just the two of us and we'll have a fair fight. The one who asks for help is a dog. What do you think? Luo Ho frowned as well. Zhang Man King gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. Do you think I'm afraid of you? You. Meanwhile, Qin Yaoyao spoke abruptly. Zhang Man, do you want to die? Everyone gazed at Qin Yaoyao when they heard this. Zhang Man gazed at her with a gloomy expression. What are you trying to say? Qin Yaoyao shrugged. Then have a life and death duel. Zhang Man King frowned. Divine King, do you think I can't defeat him? Qin Yaoyao smiled. Zhang Man, let's not talk about whether you can defeat him or not. Let's talk about whether your life and death duel is meaningful. Who would be the happiest if the two of you fought to the death? Doubting. As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. Don't you think so? Yi Xian said with a smile. But I still want to fight him. Qin Yaoyao gazed at Yi Xian. Are you sure? She was slightly displeased. Yi Xian looked Qin Yaoyao in the eyes. I'm sure. As soon as these words were spoken, the temperature in the surroundings suddenly dropped. Meanwhile, Zhang Man King stood up, but Luo Ho stopped him. Zhang Man King was about to speak when Luo Ho's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. You have to think this through. He's full of tricks and never does anything that puts him at a disadvantage. Moreover, he's ruthless. He definitely has something to rely on since he dared to challenge you, and it's very likely that even we can't stop him. Even if we can stop him, your entire reputation will be destroyed if you lose to him. Zhang Man King fell silent. At this moment, Qian Yaoyao suddenly opened her palm, and a storage ring flew into her hand in front of Luo Ho. She handed the storage ring to Yi Xian. You deserve this. Yi Xian put the spatial ring away, turned around and left. After Yi Xian left, Zhang Man King said fiercely, he's too arrogant. If it wasn't for our Dao tomb he would have already been doubting. Idiot. Qi Yaoyao suddenly turned around and glanced coldly at Zhang Man King's expression instantly turned ferocious, and he was just about to stand up when Luo Ho suddenly said, sit down. His voice was icy cold and it didn't contain a trace of emotion. Zhang Man King said in a low voice, Luo Ho, are you really going to let him do this? Luo Ho looked at Qin Yaoyao. Speak. Qin Yaoyao sat down with an expressionless face. We've always taken the initiative in our cooperation with him, but I'm afraid that's no longer the case now. Luo Ho frowned. What do you mean? Qin Yaoyao said softly. Let me ask everyone a question. Does he really need our Dao tomb? Zhang Man King said coldly. Doesn't he need it? Qin Yaoyao looked at Zhang Man. Can you use your brain a little? Zhang Man King said angrily. You. Luo Ho suddenly said. If you interrupt again, get out. In the Dao tomb, Qi Yaoyao had always been the brains of the Dao tomb. Even when the Lord was here, he was extremely respectful to Qi Yaoyao, and would discuss all major matters with her. Zhang Man King's expression was a little ugly, but he didn't interrupt again. Qi Yaoyao said, actually he doesn't need us. I've investigated before. He went to Daoting after Moon Yanyan's death, and he slaughtered countless Daoting experts at that time. He even proved his Dao by killing. In the end, the Dao ancestor had no choice but to intervene, but he's still alive. Why? Because his younger sister stopped the Dao ancestor. In other words, Yi Ling. And there's an extremely powerful soul within Yi Ling's body. Luo Ho and the others fell silent. Qi Yaoyao said again, what does that mean? It means that that person's strength isn't inferior to the Dao ancestors. Also, you seem to have forgotten that he's someone with the Calamity Seed. This Calamity Seed only exists in the legends. Of course, that's not the point. The point is that he's still alive. As she spoke, she glanced at the crowd. I've done an investigation recently and I've investigated everything about him. Do you know what I found? Luo Ho said solemnly. Speak. Qi Yaoyao smiled. He's not someone we can afford to offend. Luo Ho frowned slightly. A little exaggerated? Qi Yaoyao shook her head. It's not exaggerated at all. We all think that Mu Niannian is his greatest backer, but in my opinion that Miss Niannian isn't his greatest backer. The source of his bloodline is that woman in a plain dress. And we know almost nothing about these two people. Even with our strength we can't investigate them. If you think about this problem you'll realize how terrifying it is. Besides that, there's definitely someone who's helping him resist the calamity seed. Otherwise, with his strength he would absolutely be unable to survive until now. As for this cause of disaster, let alone resisting it, we don't even know what the hell this cause of disaster is. The calamity seed. What exactly is it? Actually, many people don't know. They only know that it's a form of karma. But exactly what kind of karma is it? No one knows. Qi Yaoyao continued, he's immune to sword qi. As for the sword sex sword qi, all of you've experienced it so you know how terrifying it is. But he's immune to it. As she spoke she looked at Zhang Man. If I were him I wouldn't absorb the sword qi. Instead I'd gather it and once I encounter an enemy I'd release it. In any case the sword qi would automatically attack others. How comfortable would that be? Zhang Man's expression turned even more unsightly when he heard this. Chapter 1393. Inside the hall Luo Ho and the others had ugly expressions. Qi Yaoyao stood up and left without another word. In the starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly stopped with a woman standing in front of him. It was Qin Yaoyao. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian and smiled. This isn't like you. Yi Xian said, about the hall? Qin Yaoyao nodded. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Yaoyao, the Dao Tomb grounds have never trusted me. No matter how many top-grade ores I hand over, you still won't believe me, right? Qin Yaoyao fell silent. Indeed. No matter how much Yi Xian handed over, the Dao Tomb grounds would think it wasn't enough. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Then how many top-grade ores did you get? Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. Miss Yaoyao, are you asking me on behalf of the Dao Tomb grounds or yourself? Qin Yaoyao blinked. Is there a difference? Yi Xian smiled. There's a huge difference. How could Qin Yaoyao not understand Yi Xian's meaning? After a moment of silence, Qin Yaoyao said, I won't ask any more. Yi Xian smiled. Farewell. With that he turned to leave. At this moment Qin Yaoyao suddenly said, Can I still kill you now? Yi Xian stopped and looked at Qin Yaoyao. I'm afraid not. He couldn't. Qin Yaoyao shook her head and smiled. She knew that Yi Xian must have had some fortuitous encounter in the dark world. Qi Yaoyao asked again, Then can you kill me? Yi Xian thought about it. I can try. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. You're so confident? Yi Xian smiled. I'm not very confident. Qin Yaoyao's lips curled. Want to exchange a few moves? Yi Xian shook his head. Miss Yaoyao, my enemy is doubting not you and not the Dao Tomb. From the very beginning I've never treated the Dao Tomb as an enemy. You should know this very well. However, the Dao Tomb doesn't think so. What do you think? After a long period of silence, Qin Yaoyao asked, Will we become enemies in the future? Yi Xian smiled and said, That will depend on what the Dao Tomb ground does. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian without saying anything. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Miss Yaoyao, have you ever thought of changing places? Qin Yaoyao was taken aback for a moment before she smiled and said, You want to rope me in? Yi Xian nodded. The fifth dimension is a good place. Are you interested in going there? Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, I'm very curious, what benefits are you going to use to win me over? Yi Xian pondered for a moment before he asked, What does Miss Yaoyao want? Qin Yaoyao asked back, What do you think I want? Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao and said, You want to destroy the doubting, the so-called Great Dao, because the Great Dao is unfair. But now the Dao Tomb grounds goal is not doubting. Miss Yaoyao, forgive me for being blunt, but even if the Dao Tomb ground destroys the doubting, the world will still be unfair because the Dao Tomb ground will be the next doubting. Miss Yaoyao, you should understand that the Dao Tomb ground is no longer fighting for their beliefs, but for themselves. Qin Yaoyao was silent. Yi Xian said again, Miss Yaoyao, you should have investigated the fifth dimension. What do you think of it now? Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, Very good. Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao and said, I want to destroy the doubting and rebuild the great Dao of order. Qin Yaoyao looked straight at Yi Xian and said, Will you not become the next doubting? Yi Xian shook his head and said, I won't. Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, Why should I? Yi Xian smiled and said, Miss Yao, you understand. With that he turned and left. Qian was silent. She naturally understood. Why did Yi Xian want to destroy the doubting? Revenge. Revenge for Moon Yanyan. What was Yi Xian's ultimate goal? To protect the fifth dimension. Yi Xian didn't care about the Tao scripture, power, or longevity. Or in other words, in his heart the Tao scripture, power, longevity, and invincibility were not the most important. To him, friends, family, and the fifth dimension were more important. Yi Xian always knew what he wanted to do and what he wanted to fight for. But the Tao Tomb Ground was no longer fighting for the beliefs of the past. What did the Tao breakers in the Tao Tomb Ground believe in? Fairness. Why did they resist the doubting? Because the great Tao was unfair. However, when they had great strength, would they fight for this so-called fairness for more people? No. Because there was no difference between them and the doubting itself. Everyone was fighting for themselves. This was why no one in the Tao Tomb Ground was able to forge a new path. In the past, the doubting was about proving one's Tao, while the Tao Tomb Ground was about breaking one's Tao. But now, above breaking one's Tao was controlling one's Tao and achieving one's Tao. In other words, the Tao Tomb Ground and the doubting path were the same. With this thought, Qian sighed and turned to leave. Doubting. In the main hall of the Divine Palace, Bai Dizzy and the others had ugly expressions on their faces. In the dark world, White Robe did not attack Yi Xian because he discovered that Yi Xian could ignore the turbid qi. Moreover, such a huge commotion in the dark world was definitely related to Yi Xian. What happened in the dark world? This was what they wanted to know the most. At this moment, Bai Dizzy said softly, "Things are getting worse for us." They really wanted to kill Yi Xian and used all their strength, but Yi Xian was still alive and well. Now Yi Xian was growing every day and they could only watch Yi Xian grow. It had to be said that this was a kind of torture for them. And now, even if they wanted to stop and make peace, it was impossible because Yi Xian would never stop and make peace. It could be said that between the doubting and Yi Xian only one could survive. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Wait." White Robe and the true martial divine lord looked at Bai Dizzy, and Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Wait for the Tao ancestor to come out of seclusion. Come out of seclusion. Now only when the Tao ancestor came out could they change the situation of the doubting. In the fifth dimension. After Yi Xian returned to the fifth dimension, he immediately called Guanyin. In the hall, Yi Xian said solemnly, "Only Shaoqi has reached Tao validation?" Guanyin nodded. And Lanxiao Arrow and Jiao are on the verge of breaking through, but it's still not enough. There aren't enough Fortune Divine Crystals. Fortune Divine Crystals. Thinking of this, Guanyin sighed softly. At this moment she realized how important the Fortune Divine Crystals were. Not only were they useful to Tao validation experts, but they were also useful to self-release experts like her. This world was like this. Without money, no matter how much effort you put in, it was useless. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took out a storage ring and handed it to Guanyin. Guanyin glanced at the storage ring, and the next moment her expression changed drastically. There were 5 million Fortune Divine Crystals in the storage ring. Moreover, these Fortune Divine Crystals were several times purer than before. Guanyin looked at Yi Xian and said with a trembling voice, "Where did you go to rob this time?" Yi Xian's face darkened. "What are you saying? What do you mean I went to rob again?" Guanyin stared at Yi Xian. "Where did you get them?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "It's a long story, so I won't say much. You can distribute these Fortune Divine Crystals." Guanyin glanced at Yi Xian and did not ask any more. She picked up the storage ring and left. In the hall, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Fortune Divine Crystals. He now had more than 38 million Fortune Divine Crystals. After giving 5 million to Guanyin, he still had 33 million left. These Fortune Divine Crystals were enough to last the fifth dimension for 100 years. What he needed the most now was time. It could be said that it was not impossible for the fifth dimension to surpass the doubting and the Tao tomb. Inside the hall, Yi Xian took out the Tao scriptures. He now had 5 Tao scriptures. He already knew that there was one in the doubting, one in the Tao tomb, and one in the whirling world. What about the last one? Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Ximing, do you know the whereabouts of the last Tao scripture?" Yi Ximing said solemnly, "No." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Tao scriptures. The spirit of the great Tao. This was what Sister Nian told him before she died. He must find the spirit of the great Tao. At this moment, Guanyin suddenly ran into the hall. She looked at Yi Xian and said excitedly, "Good news." Yi Xian was stunned and asked, "Good news?" Guan Yin nodded and said excitedly, "Many spirits came." Spirits. Yi Xian and Guan Yin disappeared from the hall. Spirit Palace. On this day, countless spirits came to the Spirit Palace. These spirits were the spirits of heaven and earth that had been ordered by Xiaolinger to find spirits. Now these spirits had returned. Not only did they return, but they also brought many spirits with them to the fifth dimension. Every spirit brought back a spirit, some even brought back a few. For a moment the entire Spirit Palace became unusually lively. Yi Xian glanced at the entire Spirit Palace. There were more than 10,000 spirits. There were all kinds of spirits. And these spirits were surrounding Xiaolinger, and Xiaolinger was giving them divine crystals of fortune. At this moment, Xiaolinger suddenly looked up at Yi Xian. The next moment she flew directly in front of Yi Xian, and all the spirits surrounded them. All the spirits were looking at Yi Xian and Xiaolinger. Xiaolinger grinned. "Brother, I want money." Yi Xian laughed. He took out a storage ring and handed it to Xiaolinger. Xiaolinger glanced at it and the next moment her eyes widened. "Wow," as she said that she gave Yi Xian a big hug. There were 300,000 divine crystals of fortune in the storage ring. The reason why he did not give more was because he was afraid that this little girl would waste it. Xiaolinger began to give the spirits divine crystals of fortune. She was very generous because she had doubled the reward. Seeing that Xiaolinger had doubled the reward, the spirits were overjoyed. For a moment, the entire Spirit Palace was filled with chattering laughter. At this moment, Guan Yin's expression suddenly changed. She looked at Yi Xian. "She's gone." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Who?" Guan Yin said with a trembling voice, "Miss Nian Nian." Yi Xian directly disappeared. The next moment he arrived in a starry sky,